The order of the meeting of the Downtown Community Task Force of September 16th, 2021. Leslie, will you please call the roll?
Yes, thank you. Member Thompson.
Here.
Member Ondersek.
Here.
Member Mayer.
Here.
Member Von Hien.
Here.
Member Vargas Smith.
Here.
Member Reed. Member Reed is not here, and he did send an email earlier this evening. Member Coyne.
Here.
Member Tai.
Here.
And Member Varshney.
Here.
Is there a motion tonight to excuse Member Reed this evening?
So moved.
I'll second.
All right.
Okay.
All in favor of excusing Member Reed this evening, say aye.
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 All opposed, say no. All right, the ayes have it. Motion carries. Member Reed is excused.
Thank you,
Staff,
Chair.
staff, please read the DCTF meeting procedures into the record.
Thank you, Chair. Meetings are conducted by the Chair in accordance with the following procedures. The Chair of the DCTF directs all activity during the meeting. Any item on this agenda may be continued to a subsequent meeting. Special procedures time limits may be applied to any items as prescribed by the Chair. Copies of the current agenda and staff reports for each of the items on the agenda are available online on the Downtown Precise Time website, as well as on the City Clerk's website. Chair?
We will now move to the consent calendar.
There are no items this evening on the consent calendar.
Okay. Moving on, we can move on to general business then, right? Or do we have to?
We can, and I do know that during public presentations, I think Member Varshney wanted to make an announcement, but I'm not sure if she's going to be able to stay for the entire meeting. So if it pleases the Chair, letting her do it at the beginning of the meeting before we move to the first agenda item.
That's all right with me if there's no other objections from the other members. All right.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Hey, I just wanted to share that I'm going to be taking a 3 to 4 months maternity break starting, and this will be my last DCTF. So I wasn't sure what's the formal method, and then the formal method to ask for at least 4 months of excuse and come back in February.
Congratulations.
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 Congrats.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Many reasons I've been very quiet with a lot of other things.
So you're going to have to come back and at least show us the baby.
Oh yeah, definitely.
great.
You'll see him around.
We've already discussed the name.
Oh yeah, Dan has given me a big name list.
All right. Thank you,
Thank you.
Aditya. And
Good news.
congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So happy for you.
Thank you. It's all new. I'm digesting.
All right, moving on to general business. Leslie.
Okay, so the first item on our agenda this evening is a review of the building height and the shade and shadow refinements of the preferred plan that the DCTF accepted back in June of this year. And we do have our consultants here with us this evening. And Jim, I'm not sure, is it you or Peter that wants to go over this?
Yeah, I can kick things off.
Okay.
So Peter, I think, is going to share screen, and then we can flip directly to the agenda. So thanks, everyone. Excited to be here tonight. And I think the original purpose of this meeting was the form-based code kickoff. So we're going to get to that. And we're going to kind of clip quickly through some items that have come up since we approved the framework plan a couple of months ago, in just the refinement process as we start to get ready to, draft the document, dotting the I's, crossing the T's, but also being sensitive to what's happening in the El Camino Real specific plan process and some of the concerns there. So we gave the solar analysis another double check. And, we found some things that we think maybe could use some refinement. So we want to go over those things with you. So yeah, it's really just 1 through 4 are just some updates. I think this can go pretty quickly, but of course, if there are questions or discussion, we're happy to do that. And then we can jump over to the form-based code kickoff. And I think most, if not all of you, were in the Council Planning Commission study session the other night when David laid out the case for form-based code and the advantages that it would have on this particular plan. So I think everyone's already pretty familiar with the approach that that David and we are proposing for that. But this is an opportunity to have some further discussion on that. So we'll try to get to that as quickly as possible. Okay, so the base and bonus heights. So this, as everyone recalls, is the framework that we all discussed and approved. It's made up of the public street network, and then coinciding with that, the essential land uses, those activating land uses of cultural destinations, retail and retail ready that activate certain key edges. And then lastly, the urban form. So those are the 3 components. And we're going to focus a little bit on the urban form. So this diagram represents the height allowances that we all worked on together, made lots of refinements through our process, and approved in the session where everyone signed off on the framework plan. And as we looked at this in more detail and became familiar with the Surplus Lands Act, the desire to use density bonuses in a couple of different ways to get community benefits, but also looking at the state regulations of allowable density bonus on affordable housing, we tried to carefully look at these height allowances in the context of those influences. And so those are summarized briefly on this slide. And so what we developed, if you go to the next slide, is a way to where we have a sort of a base height allowance that achieves the feasibility goals that we had all gone over together. So for the 2 different kinds of land uses, the housing and the office, which would be the predominant land uses. If you flip the slide, there are certain thresholds of feasibility. And I think you remember these charts here that show, where we start to get a maybe in feasibility and where we get stronger feasibility in the yes categories. So the feasibility really starts getting stronger on the residential side with 60 units to the acre, and then gets stronger as you go up to 70 and 80. And then in the next slide with office, the feasibility starts getting stronger at 4 and 5 FAR, and then gets significantly stronger above 5. So we're still trying to honor those thresholds in setting the base height so that we can, and so that's what this diagram represents. So these are all shorter than what we all looked at a couple of months ago, but they represent the minimum height of a building that would still achieve the economic feasibility as analyzed by our economists. And then to that, we add additional levels that represent the bonus heights. And so that's what this additional color is here. So you can see on most of the residential buildings, that's represented as the yellow floors. And again, our land use or our plan is going to be agnostic, as we've always said, to land use. So this is more a view of what may be probable land uses rather than land uses that are dictated by the plan. But in those areas where residential is probable, we're showing bonus heights of 3 additional floors, and that's in keeping with the state allowances to for affordable housing projects. And it typically calculates out to 3 additional floors or an additional 80% of that building's residential unit yields. So that's what's represented by the yellow floors. And then on the probable office buildings, which are the tan buildings, the bonus heights are represented by the, the darker terracotta color, which is generally depicted as 3 additional levels to those office buildings. So we were, I think, pretty happy with the way that this worked out, that we can address the allowance of bonus density and still keep it within the height limits that we all looked at together. And I think where it facilitates the building of affordable housing where that is likely to happen. So that might be on the city-owned parcels. But it also allows us in other parcels to use it as leverage to gain agreement with developers to provide public benefit. So we can offer an additional density bonus if a developer would contribute to, let's say, public realm improvements. So those can be used in different ways, but they would all still fit within the total allowable heights that we looked at. So that's just the first item we wanted to lay out there and make sure everyone was comfortable with. Are there any questions on that before we go on?
I have a couple questions, Jim. Are there any other members first though that'd like to go? I don't see hands.
You go ahead. I
Okay.
raised mine. I don't know. If
Oh,
can
there you
see
go.
it.
Now I see. Okay, so if you don't mind. So how do we determine what that public benefit is compared to the, this bonus density and height? Is that something that the plan can actually, formulate to make sure that it's a reasonable and fair benefit, if it's more affordable housing or public art fee or, what have you?
Well, yes. So I think the plan wants to set the tone and the expectation, but the plan doesn't want to overly regulate because it also wants to allow the city some negotiating room with each developer partner. So, for example, for the parcels that may go to affordable housing, it would be unlikely that those developers would have additional capacity to provide public benefit because those projects are already going to be working very close to the margin. It'll be the additional bonus floors that they're allowed that will make that project more feasible for them. Whereas projects that don't involve affordable housing, they have either market rate housing or office, they will be more likely to provide public benefit. And I think the plan wants to be flexible in terms of allowing for those different situations.
And we would suggest that because the greatest deficit in placemaking here for so many years has been public space, that although not micromanaging or tying the city's or the community's hands, I would hope that the plan includes some general description of priorities so that you don't get the wants without the needs, so you don't get so that before you start having public art in a public place, you have a nice public place, and then the art would be an additional And the same thing with, certain add-ons to the buildings in terms of different forms of LEED certification or such, that those be in addition to, not in lieu of, fine urban buildings. Because otherwise the system could be gamed by somebody who would be offering you bells and whistles instead of a good building.
It won't, it's not that it could be gamed, it will be gamed. I mean,
We've
seen
correct.
it. I mean, we've seen it
Yeah.
gamed, and that's how we've ended up with the downtown we've ended up with. I mean,
Yeah,
that's part of it, and the rest of Santa Clara that doesn't have places to go. It just
right. It's
has
just
housing. So I think that's why I don't trust just leaving it to a negotiation, a future negotiation. I think there should be some, I like your idea and your suggestion about prioritizing, and you're absolutely right. It's great if you have a budget for art, but if you don't have a place to put it, it doesn't do you much good.
Yeah, I mean,
So I
fancy wheels don't do you any good on a car that won't go.
Yeah, so I think, putting some, generalization, like some priorities together, as well as, some, loose, I don't want to make it so stringent that, that they can't pivot if, the market shifts or anything, but at the same time, setting some kind of, minimum standard that has to be met, or amount that has to be driven to get that bonus density or height, right? So
if you're negotiating with a given developer, it's more important to get 2 or 3 blocks of Franklin Street improved than it is to get a piece of public art out on, Lafayette.
Exactly. So I think
Okay,
we gotta,
that's it. We're
figure
saying
that
the
out.
same thing, I think.
Yeah, I agree. Thanks.
Okay, cool, thanks.
Dan, you had your hand up first.
Yeah, so kind of a tactical question, specific to Main and Benton. Remind me, the 2 building heights that straddle Main Street, right on Benton. So you're right there, those 2. What is the height on those?
Well, it's 7 residential floor levels.
On Benton?
No,
Well-
on Main, right, Dan?
Yeah, so it steps up. So David, to your question, yeah, you're at 3 stepping up to 7, correct?
Mhm.
You have 4.
We
There's
actually-
Actually,
there's
4
4
right at the
stepping up
corner there.
to
Yeah.
7.
Okay, got it.
We gave a little bit more volume to that mass right at the corner.
Okay. And I have another one, but I'm gonna wait on it, I think. I think you guys will probably tackle it, so thank you.
Yeah,
Right.
and that 7, just FYI, is sort of the typical throughout as we max out these residential building envelopes. And that allows us to have type 1 construction, which is 5 levels of wood construction over concrete construction. And in this case, it assumes that you would do 2 levels of concrete construction. And so that would be with the density bonus, right? So you could have a 5-story building as the base bonus, and then a 4-story building with the base height, and then a 7-story building with the bonus height added.
Okay, great. Okay, great. Thank you. Great job the other night, guys. Both you and David. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Dan.
Thank you, Dan.
Letitia, I believe your hand was next.
Yeah, I do second that comment from Dan. It was a really, really good session, and our leadership really needed to hear that. My question is, why would a developer go with our density bonus scheme and not go with the state density bonus scheme, where he's able to add more units without giving any other community benefits? And how can the city staff navigate that process? Because the state density bonus scheme works really well with providing more affordable housing, and that's a very understood metrics that most of the developers in California are working with.
Yeah, it's a great question. So it gets complicated, but what these bonus allowances are trying to do is it's trying to handle and anticipate 2 kinds of developers. For the affordable housing developer, it's trying to anticipate that they will go for the additional bonus height. And these allowances allow for that. So they can build up to, and inclusive of these yellow floors in addition to the base height. So it anticipates that. That is the likely scenario. That's probably all you will get from those developers. You won't get much public benefit because, as I said before, those projects are going to be working very close to the margins. The other track that it that it anticipates is the developer that will have some capacity to provide public benefit, and that if they are offered density bonus of a certain number of additional floors, then they're going to be incentivized to offer those public benefits. So it's trying to anticipate both of those.
There's another thing I would suggest that I haven't been paying a great deal of attention so far to the whole density bonus thing, and you have been focusing on it more, but just based on our experience elsewhere, I would suggest we need to look carefully at the various concessions that the developer of affordable housing may request, because the concessions they may request are not limited to density or height. They might request relief from, say, the frontage standards, and we need to work hard to make sure that they can't request that the city let them do completely blank walls at the ground floor, for instance.
Yeah,
that those kind of exceptions are something I would be worried about, and how we
Yes, you should be.
actually write in this plan, because once they start playing with the state density bonus, the city staff and the community will not have a lot of leeway to force our form-based code.
No, you have a bunch of junior staffers in Sacramento making it up.
I think another thing to keep in mind is that this anticipates full use of the density bonus up to, I think that's up to 80% more than what the base zoning allows. But that requires the deepest subsidies for the most units. And there are affordable housing developers who will want to come in with projects for their own reasons that don't, go to the deepest subsidies and to the most units, but are instead, tax credit projects that have, 20% of units at 60% AMI, or 40% of units at 60% AMI, and they have their own other sources of funding that are dictating that. And they may still want to make use of some of the additional increment if they're not going to get all the way up to our full height limits, because they're only going to get a 40% bonus. Then they could still use, they could also provide more community benefits in order to provide more market rate housing. I think there may be actually developers who make use of both city incentives and the state density bonus.
Good.
Thank you.
Rob.
Yeah, hi. I was just looking at, first thing my brain went to is the 10-story buildings, right? The ones that you added office, extra 3 layers. And I started thinking about Franklin Street and how those 2 that are closer to, what is it, Jackson Street, seem very tall. And I don't know, is there anything to do where you push them back, or what's the flexibility with what you did with these extra forms, the addition on top, in terms of carving them up or setting them back some?
There are some step backs on those 2. You can't see them very well, but for example, the post office is across from one of them, and there is a step back on that building.
On Jackson, I was more
on
thinking
Jackson.
Franklin, more sort of those 2 create kind of a tight little tall. It's right in the middle, kind of, but
Rob,
maybe that's okay.
Are you talking about across from the tower, kind of where?
No, that one I don't bother me
Okay.
as much, because it's more, what is that, north-south orientation? So it's this profile isn't going to impact too much, just the ones that are on Franklin that are the frontage on Franklin, the two opposing buildings that are 10 stories.
So you're in between Maine and Jackson,
Yeah,
those two.
yeah.
And what you're
just-
seeing is go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, just like possible to step that 3-story extra back a little bit so that it's not similar to the one that's on Main. They just seem like these tall pillars, and of course, look, there could be canopies and all kinds of things to break it up, but it's just the first thing my brain saw was those 3 that are along Franklin Street, those 3 tall buildings. And I don't know how it relates to the original plan. That's my other thing my brain's trying to wrap around is.
Well, these are, so yeah, I mean, it's good to react to this. These are the heights we looked at together, but you know, every time you look at it, you see something different. We definitely, you know, that happens with us all the time. So, you know, I think it's good to just have that reality check. I think we have introduced step backs in certain places. We don't have them in the way that you're describing, and that may be something that, you know, that we need to look at. We've had a lot of discussion about step backs with David Sargent and his group, and you know, there's sort of pros and cons. So I think, you know, these are tall buildings, and I think what we said collectively is that, yeah, there is a place in this plan and around this central plaza where we do want to introduce this level of density. And but you know, we need to all be sure, you know, that that's what we want to do. David, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, just thank you, Jim. I have my pen poised here. So another way to think about this would be, I'm sorry, I can't draw a very straight line with a mouse. Just another way to think of this would be to add, basically to recess a vertical piece. Just because a building's tall doesn't mean, well, having some things that start to be a little bit tower-ish could be quite nice in this context. If the widths of the pieces are
articulated,
are on a sort of more of a town scale and not so much a big city scale. And then there was a recess, which could be just a simple recess, or it could be some stacked balconies or something. And then another piece. So rather than just breaking it down horizontally, it might be articulated vertically, so that if you're going to be tall, then it should look tall, not fat.
Sure.
There's another consideration here, Rob, which is in the next topic, which is that when we went back and looked at the solar effect of these, we're actually proposing to lower these 2 on the north side of Franklin for reasons that you'll see. So we might even want to just pause this discussion until you see that, and that actually may alleviate some of your concern that these 2 opposing buildings are, you know, both tall and they're both, you know, creating this you know, this tunnel effect.
Sure. I think what I'll just do is look at this slide, and then I'll just have to chew on it a little bit, because sometimes, like you said, you play around with it for a while and you realize, well, maybe this is doing something else somewhere else might be a better compromise. But okay, yeah, let's just look at the sun study, because of course that's super important to me.
Yeah, let's look at that, and then that may affect your perception here. Are there any other questions on this before we move on?
Deborah has a question.
Go ahead, Deborah.
Yes. Hi, thank you. Yes, I want to focus on block A for a minute. I just have a question really on the color coding of the tan and the terracotta representing the office. And we had talked about possibly putting a performing arts center in that block. And if that, let's see, does the office designation include performing arts center, number 1? And then number 2, if there is the Performing Arts Center there, is it appropriate to have housing between that and Franklin?
Okay, good question. So the Performing Arts Center, what we're calling the Performing Arts Center, is sort of morphed into this community center / multi-use building and performing arts. And that's separate and different from a theater, you know, which is more like the traditional cinema. And that cinema is on the other side of Franklin. So you can see that little pink volume there that Peter is pointing to. The performing arts is actually on the Franklin frontage in Block A. So you can just barely see a little bit of the pink down there on the ground floor. That you can't really see it that well in this view, but if we were to be looking straight down Franklin Street, you'd see it in the ground floor of that building. And we felt it was important that that had frontage on the plaza as well as on Franklin Street. So we do have it. It's in that building that's shown with the residential colors. And then this taller building on the corner, we're still viewing as something that could be office, but it could also be a hotel, because that's a hotel and conference facility that we've talked about, that, you know, that would complement some of the other activities that are happening here, and including things that are happening at the university. So that building, we think, would work well with either of those land uses, but it would have conference facilities, and the performing arts would be in the other side on the plaza.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Yep.
And for instance, the bonus there is something that could be granted if the bonus height could be granted if somebody brought a fine hotel that you might not, you know, otherwise get.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think it'd be possible to identify as you move forward. It'd be possible to identify high priority uses that just don't seem likely to automatically show up. I mean, apartments will show up, but you know, nice hotels with a good restaurant downstairs, you know, not necessarily so much. Anyway, I'm sorry. That was all.
Yeah, that's good. Dan, did you have your hand up, or is that left over from before?
No, I did. So when a question I had was, and then I want to ask one on behalf of my group, is when would these heights lock in? And I know that's, you know, we have a lot of discussion to do here, but once we decide this is what the heights are going to be, this is it, right? And then
I think I would think they'll be discussed as we work on the code, because the code is what's going to say how tall the buildings are.
Understood.
And the interaction between the code and the intensity and the density bonus system, it's going to be very important to have that tightly coordinated and calibrated.
All right.
Because the plan and the code will be linked, and they'll be, you know, we still have a ways to go, including some environmental review before adoption, but all of it will be, you know, in the plan and the code and ultimately adopted together.
Right. The reason I'm asking, I'm you know, we got some feedback after your last talk on if we were to go high in one, let's say one building, because that topic came up to announce the downtown. And I'm not saying I'm advocating for this, but if there was a building that was higher, the feedback that I'm hearing is that would be more towards Lafayette. That wouldn't be as, you know, from I think the shadow study you're going to do right now and the impact on the neighborhoods around, that corner of Lafayette and Homestead is a prime location for a taller building, based on the public feedback, you know, limited public feedback that I'm getting. And you've got that at about what, 6,
Well, that's the existing building over there.
right?
But the one that we've been thinking about a lot for that landmark is the one here in the foreground at Lafayette and Benton.
Understood.
And there are some solar issues with that one, but we have a solution that might work well, that would allow you perhaps even to take a portion of that building,
Yeah,
the bar that's fronting on Lafayette, even taller. You know,
or it could just be the square at the corner. It could even be an unoccupied or lightly occupied tower element, or some kind of a roof sign. You don't have to
Agreed.
take the whole darn thing up tall.
Right, right. Okay,
and
good.
that's the one that when David showed the other night, the sort of the radial road pattern leading to downtown, that one would work well with
Yes.
that because it's visible from a lot of different angles.
Yep.
Good.
But it could be a fairly slender thing, because you could have something quite tall there, and if it's fairly slender, yeah, it might shade your house, but for 35 minutes. Because
Yep.
on account of the sun keeps moving.
So let's segue to the solar, because I
Rick.
think these are, did someone have?
Yeah, sorry, Jim, real quick. I had one
go
question
ahead.
that you guys actually brought up earlier in the conversation, and that is that this is the precise plan bonuses, but the state bonus goes as well as this. They can stack. Is that correct?
No, what we're saying is
Okay.
that these would include, the state bonuses would be within these, so they would be
Within those. Okay,
they would be the yellow floors.
perfect. I just wanted to make sure I heard you correctly. that
Yes.
So
either
the
they did or
base,
did not stack. They do not stack. Ours are above and beyond what the state requires. So it's
they're alternative. I think
got it.
basically I think the way these have worked in other cities, the developer gets to pick one or the other.
Got it. I just wanted to make sure I heard it correctly, because I'm sure a lot of other people would
Yep.
want to make sure that there's no stacking.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course.
Thank you. Okay, I'm done.
Yeah. No, we tried to have everything fit within the heights that we all settled on. So, okay, great. So let's go to the solar access. So, yep, next slide. Okay, so this was the summer solstice, no problems here, 9 a.m., 12 p.m., 4 p.m., we're all good. And this is with the, with the scheme that we've all been looking at. And then the spring equinox, 9 a.m., you start to get tiny bit of shading down here at Benton and Lafayette. But otherwise we're in pretty good shape here. And that building there that we're shading is a commercial building. It's sort of a one-story commercial building. So I
Yeah.
think not a huge concern there. And then going to the next slide, this is the winter solstice. Here's where we start to have some issues. So at 9 a.m. is where the problem is. So really from maybe 8 to 9 o'clock, we are getting some shading all along Benton, but not complete shading. You can see that there are still some homes that are in the sun. Their front yards might be shaded, but there are certain homes that are, that are shaded
And
by these buildings.
It'd be important to understand, from what time to what time.
Yeah,
From 7 to 9.
Yeah, from 7 to 9, and for a period of maybe a couple of months, on either side of December 21st.
But if on the other hand, they would have if they'd be generally sunny, from 9 in the morning to 4:30 in the afternoon, it's a lot of sun.
Yeah, and so some of this is going to depend on what the sensitivity is with the community, but you can see on this corner building here at Benton and Lafayette, the shadow actually casts all the way to the next street.
Yeah.
And so that could be that could be of concern. So we noted that, and you can see, sorry, just back one real quick, Peter, 12 o'clock and 4 p.m. we're good to go. So, you know, it's really a morning problem.
Early
And then-
morning.
Yep, an early morning problem, exactly. And so then the next slide, you can see this a little bit closer. So, and you can compare it here to the existing condition, right? So on the left is
So
the
vacant
existing
lots cast
condition.
no shadow.
And I'm not sure this really reflects the redwood trees that are in front of the, you know, the apartment buildings here. So it's probably a little bit worse than what we're showing. But then on the right, you can see in the proposed condition, this is the same view we were looking at in the last one, just a little bit closer, so you can see the detail and you can see the level of shading that happens. And so the culprits are this corner building that we talked about at Benton and Lafayette, but also these two taller buildings on the north side of Franklin, what we've been referring to as the office buildings. Both of those are casting shadow on some of the houses across Benton. And so we looked at that and looked at what height adjustments essentially for those three buildings. There's a little bit of an adjustment to one of the mid-block residential. Yeah, those two, but I think it's one floor of adjustment, so pretty minor on that one. So if you go to the next one, so this is the original heights diagram that we've been looking at, and the proposed height reductions are on this next view. So I think if Peter just flips back and forth, you
Yeah.
can see what's happening here.
Yeah.
Okay, so the two buildings on the north side of Franklin, you can see those. And then if you watch the corner building at Benton and Lafayette, you can see what's happening there. So
Yeah.
the strategy on that one is we actually leave a tower portion.
I think
Possibly.
that might look better too.
Yeah, yeah. And then lower, because it's that east-west length that is casting such a shadow. But if you have the narrow dimension be the east-west and the longer dimension be the north-south, then it's casting a much narrower shadow. And so, yeah, it's really those three tall buildings are the major changes. And then if you just flip a couple more times, Peter, on that mid-block residential, you can see that those also are just, and it's actually just one of them that's slightly adjusting. Okay, so I think on the next one, we can see the effect of those changes. So on the left is the original one, and then on the right is the revised height. And you can, if you just look back and forth between the two, you can see that many of the homes that were in shade in the original concept are in sun in the reduced concept. And, you know, there's still some front yards shaded, but as David says, this is for a couple of hours in the morning during, you know, a couple of months in the dead of winter. So, you know, we don't want to overblow the problem, but we also want to make sure that we're not going to be, you know, presenting something that is going to be shocking to the neighbors. So that's really our recommendation, is to make those changes. It does reduce the capacity of the plan some, not significantly. And in the next section, we're going to talk about capacity, because we want to just tell you about our approach to caps on certain land uses, and at the same time we can quantify the amount of capacity we're losing with these changes. But you know, our general feeling is that it's, you know, still quite a robust plan in terms of the capacity that we're providing here, and that this is, you know, a relatively minor change, and you know, something that probably buys you some goodwill with the neighbors. So are there any questions on that before we move to the capacity portion? Bruce, sorry, Butch.
Put you on mute. I was too, though.
Thank you. Thank you, Jim, David. Appreciate it. Question I have is looking at that building on the corner of Lafayette and Benton that we're discussing about the height.
Mhm.
The one next to it that's in the center of the block, does a height difference, would that solve any of our problem? That one there, would that solve any of the shadowing problem if we went higher there and lower on the corner? Or as David said, which I like, is that square corner to get some height on it would be another option. But I was really looking at that middle building. What kind of effect would that have if we went higher on that and took it lower on the corner?
Yeah, interesting thought. I think if we made that middle building the sort of the landmark tower, my concern would be that it starts to dehumanize the plaza a little bit. You know, there's something nice about how that tower works on the corner, because it's up against, the street edges. It's, it's a very prominent and visible corner as people are coming from the plaza. I would be a little worried. I mean, what you're suggesting would certainly help the shadow issue. No question about that. But I would be concerned about those other considerations, I think.
And I would agree with you. My preference would be to build that corner up. I think
Yeah.
it should be the showplace.
Yeah.
So I would agree with you there. And there's got to be creative ways of opening that building up, or as David said, different configurations to let some more sun through, or some configurations. But just wanted to check on that middle one. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And just to further reduce the time period during which that shadow is touching somebody's yard.
Yeah, just sort of make that tower slender, and so that it's a passing thing. And
yeah.
Atisha, did you have something also?
If that was a hotel, that could also generate some rooms that could have a view for a very long distance.
Well, that was part of the thought, is could that be the hotel?
Of course. Yes, thank you, Butch.
I think for me, it's not a question, but more of a comment. At some point, we need to stop thinking about single family homes and shadowing them, and take a bolder approach to more progressive future. And what happened on El Camino Real was just, for me, a bad example of decision-making, not a good example of decision-making. And that's what my stand is. So like, to reduce like 100 or 200 housing units, just because some people love their front yards and cannot deal with additional 1 hour of shadow, is not a very progressive way to move forward. And I know a lot of DCTF members will not agree with me here, but this is just who I am and my stand towards better density and better downtown than like, handful of 7, 8, 10 homes. I don't know how many we are talking about here versus hundreds of housing units. And El Camino Real was a really bad example, if that's what the team has learned from it.
And
I couldn't stop sharing that, frustrated.
And I think it's reasonable to think about the benefits to people who live nearby here, that all of a sudden they're going to be a 90-second walk from the nicest little cluster of restaurants and shops, for probably
the real estate values they're going to make. Like,
I think I think most of these homes are going to be worth a lot more money.
Exactly.
A 2-minute walk from this beautiful little downtown than they are, looking at a lot of dirt lots.
And a lot of them are going to flip themselves once this downtown comes in. Are you going to tell them at that point, like, don't flip and don't build into your back front yard, don't go for density bonus and exceptions? No, we're not going to do that. So it just feels a very lopsided thought process coming out of El Camino Real, and how our leadership kind of took that decision. I'm still very frustrated. So that's me.
But
it's a great point.
It is that same leadership, right, that we need to be understanding how they think. And
Thank you, Tisha. Dan?
Super quick comment on that. So our group studied Campbell and walkability to downtown, same house versus 2 miles away. And it was 15% or more. So
Yep.
it's quite
It
a
adds
jump.
lot of value.
Yeah.
Butch, did you have another comment or yes?
Yes, I did.
Go
This
for
is
it.
kind of going off on a tangent, and maybe this isn't the appropriate time. But I had the opportunity when I was in Indianapolis to work with the rebuilding of the downtown in Indianapolis. And they started playing with the height of buildings on the main drag. So my question is not having to do with the sun, but having to do with wind. One of the issues is once the downtown was built in Indianapolis, it created substantial wind tunnels because additional height was added to the buildings. Is this anything that we would need to be concerned on, especially on Franklin Street with the way we create the tunnel, the higher we go?
I don't know.
It's a good question. It's not something that we've studied to any depth, but it's a great question.
So we had the same issue in San Jose when we built the Rep Theater on the Paseo. The way we positioned it, we didn't do a wind study on it, and it created a wind tunnel on the Paseo next to the Hammer Theater, which is there too. So again, might be something that we want to take a look at, because the last thing we want to do is create those wind tunnels at certain parts of the day. We know how the wind picks up around 4 or 5 in the afternoon. Again, I have no expertise in it, but it's something I think the taller we go with those buildings, what are we creating when it comes to the wind patterns?
Very good point, Butch.
Yeah, it's a good point. I
Yeah.
think we do have some opportunity in the EAR process to look at, to look at wind effect. So that's a really good point, and I think something to pursue.
All right.
Great. Well, I don't.
Your hand, Tisha, is your hand up or? Okay, no worries. Sorry, Jim.
Okay, let's keep pushing on. I think we want to leave an hour if possible for the form-based code piece of this. So Peter, why don't you go ahead with this part?
Sure. So we were beginning to look now at how much development does this model enable, and how should the plan regulate that amount of development. So just starting again with the assumptions which we've looked at together numerous times, which underlie some of these development findings. So here we're comparing the original concept with this reduced concept, meaning reduced heights in certain locations in order to preserve solar access to those houses. You can see, I think I want to first focus on just line by line, not so much comparison, but looking across the table. So looking at the original concept, the model that we've looked at together would enable about 1.6 million square feet of development as a base without any of the community benefits, and an additional 850,000 square feet of development were those bonuses to be realized. So total development capacity of about 2.4, 2.5 million square feet. Broken down by land use, and again, we don't want the plan to be dictating land use to this extent, but were the model to be developed, that would result in 884 units in the base, plus an additional 700 units of bonus, for a total of approximately 1,600 units.
And that's, I'm sorry to interrupt, but that's based on what average gross square feet per dwelling?
We're doing an average of 900 for the market rate housing and 2,000 square feet for the townhomes.
Thank you.
Gross, so including.
I understand.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And then the rest of that square footage, of course, is either in an office hotel category or at the ground floor retail ready, or some of those catalyst uses, the entertainment uses that are important for the plan. Then if you look at the reduced concept, you can see, as Jim said, there's a little bit of reduction of capacity. It's not that significant.
It's really not.
It's almost no reduction in what we would expect to come out of the plan in terms of housing, because the reductions came out of the taller office and hotel modeled buildings. So most of the reduction comes in the office hotel category. dropping it from about 750,000 to 670,000 by about 80,000 square feet there.
Peter, real quick, what is the rough footprint of 2,900 parking spaces with drive aisle? I'm just wondering, because you have square footage of the total development, but I'm just wondering how much in comparison is going to be our parking.
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't have, I can't tell you. I can say that those
It'd be
2,900,
around 100,000 square feet.
100,000 square feet? Okay. I just think it's a
sort
good
of
thing
like
for people to
300 square feet
understand.
or 400 square feet.
I was just using 350
Yeah.
and it comes out to 101,000. Yeah, so
101,000.
Okay.
so 100,000 is, plus or minus 5%.
And that's both in the podium of buildings and also in freestanding garages.
Yeah, I get that it's mixed, but I think it's just really good for people to understand the impact of parking in relation to a development.
And right, and the parking ratios that are being proposed here are relatively low because of the mixing and because of the anticipated transit access and the efficiencies of mixing uses.
So we also wanted to compare the development capacity to the current general plan in the downtown core. The current general plan doesn't specify what it assumes the development capacity to be in the full in all of the downtown.
Just a quick thing. It's not 100,000, it's 1 million.
Million.
That
Oh, come on,
sounds
wait.
better.
I'm
That
so
sounds
sorry.
better.
That sounds more scary. 100,000 seemed really low to me.
No, I'm sorry. How many parking spaces did you say?
2,900.
2,900.
So it's
A
about
million.
350 per
Oh,
space.
Jesus. I'm so sorry. Thank you. Yeah, that
Power-
seemed low to
Power
me.
of 10, power of 10.
Million.
Can you just, Peter,
Cars are big.
just
Sorry.
jump back real quick, Peter?
It helps
Excuse me.
make
So we
Adam's
have roughly,
point.
so roughly 1/3 of the total developed space is parking.
Yes. So Adam, that didn't sound right to me either, but the
No, it
general
didn't to me
rule,
either. I'm sorry.
the general rule of thumb on office is that it's the same square footage of office surface area to office parking. So if
Yes.
if you imagine an office building in that volume, usually to park that, you would require the same volume building right next to it. And I think most people don't realize that, and it's quite a shocking comparison. But if you're looking at 3 cars per 1,000, that's what it actually works out to be. Now, our ratios are lower, as David said. So we're using 2 spaces per 1,000 for the office because of transit proximity and sharing and a lot of other things. So our volume comparison would be less, but just as a general rule of thumb, that's what it is. It's shocking.
No, that's great. I just wanted to bring it up because for everybody who watches this video and public and everything as well. So
Yep.
Thank you.
That's why we need transit right there.
That's why we need it.
Yeah.
Right,
Well, and it's
right
so
down
close.
Benton.
All you got to do is get to it.
Yep.
I would say, I think I would correct this. I think the reduced concept, we would naturally assume actually a reduction in the parking to correspond with the reduction in office space as well. We didn't catch that, but it would.
Good point.
Yeah,
Good
but
point.
it's not going to make that much.
Not much.
It's
Not
just
that
a real
much.
quick comparison. Thank you, Peter. Appreciate it. Sorry.
Yep.
No, that's helpful. So the downtown core is a land use designation in the city's current general plan, which is outlined here in pink, and is this strange organism which takes in most of the city-owned properties on blocks A and B, and on block D. Actually, all of the city-owned property.
All the city-owned property, yeah.
As well as the property on the corner of Benton and Lafayette.
Mhm.
So the current general plan states that there's a capacity in that pink area for 130,000 square feet of non-residential development and 396 housing units. And our concept, our original concept with base and bonus would raise that to 480 units and about 270,000 square feet of non-residential development. And then the reduced concept would just reduce that because that hotel tower is more slim. We're losing about 20,000 square feet in that area.
And if, as could happen, less office ends up being attracted to here, then it would just go to housing.
Yeah.
So if the office if the office dropped significantly, the housing could increase very significantly.
So that's a good segue to this idea of caps. Our proposal here is that the model that we've been working with should be considered the sort of housing maximum model. That this is, if we want a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week downtown that has a mixture of activity and uses, we wouldn't want much more housing than this. We'd want about this much non-residential development to be mixed in. So we're calling this the housing maximum. And I think this is something that we should discuss together, because we haven't yet had a chance to discuss this. And so that right relative, sort of what is the right amount of elasticity between housing and office primary uses, I think is where we're at right now.
And this also can be called the office minimum.
Yes.
And yeah, I think it would be better to call it office minimum, because the housing that you're mentioning, those 1,586 units, is based on an understanding of how many square feet, how many gross square feet of building would be devoted to housing. If the average unit size for apartments was 750 or 800 instead of 900, you'd have a lot more units.
So this is a good point.
And if you had a lot fewer townhouses, or if the townhouses were less than 2,000 square feet, you'd have a lot more units. So I would strongly recommend that either it be a minimum. The best would be to just identify it as a minimum on the non-retail, non-residential, i.e. office, hotel.
Would it just be a ratio between square footages?
Yeah, something that'd be fine. But
Yeah,
just
we could use square footage too.
Let's not express it in dwelling units.
Yeah, good point.
Otherwise, you're going to get people building bigger units than the market wants, just to use them, in order to sell the square feet.
Yeah, good point.
So I think what the plan would want to do would be to regulate this in terms of square feet, as you say, David. We will have to, I think, for purposes of modeling other things like traffic and so on, I think we will have to make some assumptions about the number of housing units that would likely translate to.
And those will be assumptions for the EIR, not regulatory.
But I think they're helpful for us as well in our conversation to understand what's the likely outcome. And then I think that this is an important point, that for the plan, as it gets regulated, we'd want to back up probably into square feet. I wouldn't say we'd call this the office minimum, because I don't think we can set minimum amount of development. This may be an item, something we discuss.
Yeah, you can't mandate economic success.
Exactly. We'd love to see it happen, but I'm not sure we can say there's a minimum amount that's allowed. So then we go to a sort of a second scenario where we're imagining that actually we get a little bit more office.
So Peter, just so everybody saw that change, flip back and forth to,
oh yeah, cool.
Everybody can see where we've added 2 office buildings.
Nice.
Okay. Now this would change the numbers a bit. So we get higher square footage in the office category, in the office column, and fewer housing units. Now, what we're suggesting is that the plan would set caps both for, well, not both, in multiple categories. So a cap of overall development, which is in this summary column. Let's say the cap would be about 2.5 million square feet of development. It would set a cap of square feet in the housing category, not units. Let's take that.
Good.
Square feet in the housing category, which corresponds to our housing maximum model. And it would set a cap of office square feet that corresponds to the office maximum. But you can see these 2 numbers aren't going to add up to this. That would be too much. So you can't get all of it. But you can max out one. You can max out one or the other, but not both.
And then stay within the overall
and cap. Stay within the overall cap. And
That's a
we
good
also,
way to approach it.
and we'd also be keeping this ethic of we're not mandating where the buildings go. So just because we've modeled these two outcomes doesn't mean that's exactly where those buildings are going to land. It's just that that's the right proportion. We think somewhere in that range is the right mix of office, hotel, and housing.
Yeah,
And,
that's
and,
the,
and if it turns out in 10 years or 15 years or whatever, that the market is just stubborn, then, you know, that's why plans can be amended.
Yeah, yeah, right. If it turns out that all we're getting is residential, they reach the residential cap, there's no office, and this is not what we want to have happen.
But then you don't want the rest of it to just stay vacant.
Right.
So how do we, I mean, I guess that's a question for Leslie, right? How do we modify the plan swiftly in order to continue to see continual growth? Not like, you know, I mean, just example, like the general plan hasn't been updated, right? Sorry, Leslie, I'm not trying to put you on the spot. I'm
It's
just wondering, like,
coming.
how do you
It's not
build that
time to
in?
update the general plan yet. We've got a little while. They last about 10 years.
Well, it's just, there's always stuff to do. So
There is always stuff to do.
I know how it is, right? Priorities. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean,
Yes.
I guess
but,
we just
you
have
know,
to deal with it at that point.
yeah, I think that's why plans get updated because
Mhm.
conditions change, you know, economies change, public perception changes about density. So I think there's just a natural cyclical process that happens every, you know, 10, 15, 20 years where you have an opportunity to come in and make appropriate amendments.
The plan could even, I mean, it'd be possible to put something about that in the plan, recognizing that economies are dynamic. I mean, you could build into the plan like a 10 or 15 year program review. I mean, just like your general plan, you know, the state makes you update it every 10 years, whether you want to or not. I mean, we could just say, well, you know, this is our very, very well educated guess at this point, but within, you know, in no less than 10 years and no more than 15, we will revisit it with some sort of specified economic fiscal analysis.
Are we allowed to get the band back together for it?
Yes.
put
Go
that-
ahead, Dan.
Put that in there too. Reconvene.
I don't know if you can answer this, but is there a square footage per office worker that you guys know of? You know, when you say this number of square foot?
It's changing. It's changing as we speak.
But, well,
Well, yeah, there's certainly some norms. Jim?
Isn't it something like 1 to 300 square feet or something like that? The
Well,
size of your cubicle?
there's a whole lot of different numbers.
Yeah.
We've been through this recently in another city. The fire department has a number based on how many people they may have to haul out of a building if it's on fire. And that's what the building code says. And then there's assumptions based on parking, and there's assumptions based on different types of office.
Yeah, I think for tech companies like what Google uses, and this is just from the CBRE report, pre-pandemic, it was about 300 square feet per person, which is equivalent to parking one car. So like for every person, you need 300 square feet of office space, and then you need one car space, so it's like 600 square feet. Post-pandemic, those numbers are still like fluctuating. Some people are increasing them to 500, 600 as the office space is being leased out. So I would say if you need accurate numbers, just track CBRE reports for what the office space leasing has been. And Adam, I'm sure you're at Apple, so you would know what Apple is leasing things out at.
But there's another variable, which is that a lot of companies, including ours, are planning that employees will actually be in the office around half the time.
Yeah.
So that might, in the future, enable 500 employees to occupy the same square footage that 300 employees used to, because they're only there 3/5 of the time. So
Yep.
it's a very complicated subject these days.
Got it. All right, thank you.
Very interesting and worth studying, for sure.
Atisha?
That's actually my quick question was like, it's also kind of like a question and comment more to Leslie is like, what can the city do to incentivize more office? I know some cities support TIs and other incentives to bring more office because we know that office brings more business and more sales tax. So I don't know how much as part of this plan and what EPS is doing, but it will be good to have some recommendations as part of this plan, like for housing, we have a lot of incentives we have understood through the process, but to understand incentivizing office, and especially there is so much conversation about affordable office space coming into as these big Google plans on Bayshore and downtown is coming, how we can also incentivize like not-for-profits and other smaller businesses that can coexist with bigger powerhouses in our downtown.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely programs that cities have used to incentivize office, like you said, reduce taxes or reduced fees for tenant improvements or things of that nature. This plan didn't anticipate that. That's not to say we can't have that as a future action item to study in implementation section, because that would be sort of a separate body of work. But
Okay.
Yeah, one of the things that we've talked about is for the bonus density to actually have a portion of that be simply bonus for building office.
Yes.
So that would be, that would be the carrot, and it gets a little complicated because those office buildings are located on some of our best, public space, and you don't want to give all the bonus away just for building office because you'd like to have some incentive left to, to help pay for the public amenities. But yeah, that was something that we can, look at in this prioritization of public benefits.
Jim, I think that we could address that in part by making it so that developers, when they're paying into public amenities, those amenities could take place throughout the district.
Mm-hmm.
So even a developer who's not directly on the Central Grove could help support it.
Yep.
Yeah, because there probably needs to be there needs to be some sort of an infrastructure financing, implementation, management, maintenance, and operations district. And once money's paid into that, the district gets to decide where it's most important to spend it next.
Good. So any comments on these development caps before we I think we can sail through this last piece pretty quickly.
I see two hands up.
Anna.
Hi guys. There's a couple trends going on recently, and you might have heard about it, and it may impact, the attraction for office in our downtown. One is that, the remote. People are choosing to work for companies who are allowing them to work out of state or work remotely. So that may make office look less attractive. The other thing that's happening right now is a tax on headcount. I know Google got hit pretty hard in Mountain View with this in the millions of dollars. So it may be something that companies who are thinking about office space are now trying to find ways to reduce headcount as well. So all of this is happening kind of post-COVID. So it may make office look less attractive to the downtown for other companies or developers.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to be an office developer this year.
No.
Atisha, is your hand still up or? We're good?
Sorry.
Yep, no problem. All right, I think we can continue on, Peter.
Okay.
And Jim?
So the last topic is all we have, I think, is one slide here, but just acknowledging that we haven't looked closely at these single-family houses that exist on the westernmost blocks in our district. We haven't given them a lot of attention as a group. And so I think we need to discuss what our stance is, what the plan stance is toward these houses. And I think what the model is doing is it's expressing an intention that those buildings can remain, that the plan includes development standards and perhaps incentives that that work toward those buildings remaining. But I think that could be done in a variety of ways. And one way could be to enable development at the same scale that we would be enabling along Benton, which is, the townhome scale designed to, step down to neighboring buildings, but to create incentives for that development capacity to be used instead on neighboring sites. So it could be that on the Western blocks, this bonus increment could be earned by a transfer of development rights from the adjacent houses.
But that would mean that the base zoning for the land under those houses would be the same as for the rest of the block. And then you would put incentives to build that elsewhere. I mean,
could be not the same, could be a townhome scale density.
Oh,
Which
I'm sorry, excuse me.
Could
I'm sorry.
Could be as you say as well. So that's, I think we need to hammer that out.
So then the question, so the first question is it a high priority of the plan to retain those buildings? And if so, then what's an effective mechanism for doing that?
Right.
In a way that compensates the property owners of those buildings fairly for not availing themselves of the opportunity to make the land worth more money by building something else on it.
Mm-hmm.
Anna?
So I'm leaving it there because I don't think we don't have a strong stance on this yet, and I think because of where we are in the process. But I think it's a good discussion item.
Letitia, you have a question?
Yeah, my first question is, are we, like, when we are zoning or doing a land use zoning diagram for this downtown, are we zoning it in a way that this building or this block is housing and this block is office? Or is it going to be a bigger, like, this is all downtown zone and these are all the conforming uses?
The latter.
Okay. So all the uses that we are putting in the downtown can be applied to these single family homes also.
Yes.
They could be used as offices for sure, or they
so they can become like small cottage Airbnbs and art studios.
Or a restaurant.
So we can retain the texture because there are some historic houses here. So we can retain the texture of architecture, but like adapt these to, okay. So that's great because like that will be kind of my first preferred thing, like to kind of have some of that grain and texture of like craftiness and more like intimate spaces. If some of this can be, protected, even if a developer wants to come and buy all of them together and like connect and remove the fences, but like just making sure that that level of craft, if someone wants to play with these houses, is the plan allows them to do it, and writing that flexibility right now.
Or and now another level of flexibility would be to enable the construction of larger buildings in the backyards.
Exactly. So I like the density bonus. Definitely, that's a great idea. And just to make sure that all the land uses are applicable to these single family homes too, that helps them to monetize.
Nice.
I guess a question I would ask is, following on Atisha's point is, I like your philosophy that you described there. So how about if we not only allowed that, but how do we incentivize that, through the plan? I think that would be good to give that some thought.
And I think density bonus might incentivize them because they can sell their air rights to surrounding parcels and then use that money to reinvest in the downtown. And I don't know if everyone understands air rights in this meeting, so if someone wants to go and explain, that might be helpful.
Anybody else want to weigh in on this? or have any comments? Okay. I mean, my comment is, I think we just, this is not the focal point at this point, and I think we need to be, mindful of the single-family residences around this side of it. And so I like the idea of still incentivizing, but not building it here, but putting it where it makes more sense down towards Lafayette in the center of the downtown. So I think that is still a good way to incentivize and to help out.
Okay, we'll give some more thought to that, but that's helpful. It
Without-
is sort of the general spirit of where we want to go with that area. Great. So I think that ends the first piece. David, do you want to take over the share screen?
And just
Yeah,
before
please.
before you do that, I just wanted
Yeah.
to let the task force know that we are taking this plan to the council on September 28th for their acceptance. So that will include the development capacities, which then that'll set, what we're going to use to start our environmental impact report for and sort of move forward through the process. So again, this will be going on the 28th of September to council for their acceptance.
And before it goes to them, can we clarify the business about the square footage versus dwelling unit counts?
Yes.
Great, thank
Yep.
you.
Definitely. And Leslie, I guess just to reiterate what we talked about, I think if everybody feels comfortable with these height adjustments to address the solar, we wouldn't really raise that as an issue with council. We would simply present the plan that we and the task force have worked and settled on. I think that's sort of the approach we talked about, rather than saying, here's the plan that we developed, and then here's
Right.
the
Correct.
height adjustments that we made later. I don't think, that level of detail is needed.
Just
Correct.
present the reduced heights plan as the plan.
Yeah.
As the plan. And I
As the
don't know, Chair, if you would like to have the task force take a vote on that. So we're very official in our acceptance of
Yes.
the reduced heights.
We should take a vote, especially since it has to go before the next
Correct.
DCTF meeting.
Correct.
Take a vote on the recommendation.
On the recommendation to reduce the heights as shown.
All right, so we have a motion,
So moved.
second.
Second.
All in favor of reducing the heights heard as the discussion, say aye.
Hi.
Aye. All opposed, say no. The ayes carry. Thanks,
Thank
Leslie.
you. Thank you.
Great.
Do we want to also
Thank you.
do a similar exercise for the development caps concept?
Yeah, on the ratio,
Yeah,
is there a way that we can get, do you know what the ratio would be? That's hard, right? You probably
Yeah.
want to go back and look at it.
by ratio, are you referring to the sort of elasticity of housing and office, like how much?
Yeah, how much office to housing at any given point through the plan, right? That's what we're talking about, keeping them kind of,
Or how much residential to non-residential square footage?
yeah.
Right.
And making sure as they're building one, the other one's keeping its with, right in tow, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right, but that gets complicated because if the block A and B are the first to go, and they wouldn't have that ratio, they would have more housing. Actually, I'm
Right.
not sure of that because
Yeah,
there are two. Okay, yeah, good
Worth
point,
thought, okay.
Adam. We need to give that some more thought.
Yeah, the only reason I say this is because we've run into this along, in other development areas or along El Camino, right, where there's certain requirements for, FARs, and then, one development doesn't do it or gets an exception, then the next one gets an
Mhm.
exception, and so forth and such, and all of a sudden we kick this can way down the road, and we only have one component of the
Yeah.
total mix. So that's why I think there should be something that tethers it loosely to where if you have a, way over density, everybody's building housing, that the office project has to get going before we continue to just feed the one source.
But so if we've only gotten as far so far as identifying the caps, could we say we agree on the idea of these caps and that there should be a phasing mechanism that ensures some ratio of development of mixed use takes place throughout the plan development?
I think a phasing and monitoring. I mean, in the same way that you might review the plan every 10 or 15 years, you might review ongoing development annually or every 2 years or every 3 years. Basically, this is in the same way that, I mean, this is complicated. In the same way that downtown parking has to be actively managed, I think this mix has to be actively managed.
That's why they used to have redevelopment agencies for this kind of stuff, because it's complicated.
And that's what planning departments used to do. I mean, planning departments used to actually plan.
Hey, Leslie plans.
No.
I put in this whole meeting.
No. Excuse me. I don't mean that, but I mean in general, planning departments of a lot of, not yours, thank goodness, but a lot of planning departments have sort of atrophied into permit processing departments. So, but anyway, I think there has to be a sort of a hands-on, some kind of a tracking system.
Well, couldn't you do it at every development proposal or submission within the precise plan itself?
Yeah.
So it stays within that, so-called quasi range, or that relationship between housing and office, and you can go slightly outside of that range for one project, but the next project would then need to bring it back in, so that way it keeps it kind of balanced, right?
I'm not sure how to monitor that, especially like when it's privately owned land and they would come and say that this is what, I want to do, and this is what the market is supporting right now, and this is what I'm getting funding and financing for. So to do it at that micro level might be different, but
well, it would be, no further housing proposals are going to be considered until we get an office proposal.
Right.
I guess to play devil's advocate, the only difficulty I see is, sort of on this point. What if this, the aftermath of COVID on this office market lasts 15 years and blocks A, B, and D, really, the market wise, they all want to be residential. And there's not even a corner office building. Maybe there's a hotel, but who knows? So I guess if that happens, first of all, is that a terrible thing that those 3 blocks would be all residential, as long as we're getting our activating ground floor uses, we're getting our Franklin Street, going through. So maybe where I'm going is that, yes, there does need to be a phase by phase monitoring to keep this balance, but it needs to be pretty flexible.
Mm-hmm.
I agree. Yes, for sure.
We could always do an addendum or an amendment to the plan as well. You're talking, if it doesn't happen in 10 to 15 years, I mean, at that point, we're most likely going to be doing a revision to the plan of whatever's left and hasn't been built out at that point. Yeah. And so maybe at that point you can reduce or modify that relationship between housing, office, and hotel.
Yeah, so there you go.
Because at some point it maybe, at some point it could come down to something as simple as, well, if you need this percentage of your downtown to be office, you're going to be waiting 60 years for a downtown.
Right.
And then you get to decide how you feel about waiting 60 years.
This kind of also discussion reminds me of David, very early presentations you made about showing all these LA downtown buildings who have changed land use within the same building farm over last 50 years. So how we write our land use and how we permit that land use going inside a building, particular building. I feel like that process should be adaptable. Like even if I build it for the first 10 years to be all apartment buildings and I see offices taking place, can I change the first 2 floors and make it into a WeWork thing? And what will the city require me to do that at that point? You know, and if that process is adaptable, then we'll see downtown responding to the market more actively.
I mean, the way to build cities that are sustainable is to build cities that you don't have to knock them down every time the economy gets a cold.
Yeah, I mean,
the hard part with what you're talking about though, Atisha, is there's very different building types and products, right? And so you'd have to build to David's point, build to be adaptable to either housing and or office in certain locations, because the two are not, you know, you can't flip one to the other so easily. There's, you know, light, egress, ventilation. I mean, there's a bunch of different complicated things with both of them from a building perspective. So again, if the builders wanted to put a little bit money up front, or the developers up front early to make it very flexible space, then absolutely that would be, I think, beneficial for everybody and the plan in the city, everybody. But that takes money out of the initial return on investment, and it's a long-term play, which I just haven't seen most development really putting that much cash in the beginning up front to do that. So that's why I still think, you know, and I love the idea of the market will handle itself, but that's not ever the case. The market will do whatever is the most profitable, not what's
in the short run.
Not what's best for the long term. And so that's why I think, you know, yes, we want to be flexible, but we also need to have the vision clearly defined and put in some regulations and some, you know, some checkpoints to make sure that the whole thing is managed from start to finish, because this is going to be a 20, 30, 40 year, you know, endeavor for the city. And I know Leslie's going to be here for 40 more, but I probably won't. So we want to make sure that the city, the planners have the tools, and count, you know, everybody has the tools moving on to make sure that there's checks and balances.
We're counting on you, Leslie.
Yeah, I'll be here.
I got all my eggs in your basket.
Leslie will be telling the story of Santa Clara downtown 20 years from now, sitting under the tree at the coffee shop on the corner of Lafayette and Benton.
I'll have a coffee hour.
All right.
So maybe we don't need to come to any conclusion about this, other than these are the development caps that are associated with those models that we took to City Council.
Yeah.
So, well, I guess what we should do though is make the motion that we do want some kind of relationship between the boundaries of how much housing and how much, but we want to determine them as we give a little bit more thought, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be good to set these maximums for housing and office as a, you know, as a project-wide goal. And then I think the thing that we need to work on is the detail of how that's monitored over time, how flexible it is, what's the, you know, the frequency of updates of the plan. It's all of that language of the plan.
So just looking at the numbers, prefacing this by saying I disgraced myself numerically a little while ago with that factor of 10 on the parking. But it looks to me like the total of the office, hotel, and retail ready is pretty much half of the total. So the residential square footage to non-residential square footage looks like about 50-50 to me.
Yeah.
Pretty close.
And 900 times 1,586 is going to be something close to 1.5 million.
See, thank you. Yeah, of course, right. Yes,
right. 350 or something like that.
Yeah, one.
Yeah, so it's about half residential and non.
Yep.
So I guess I can make a motion to allow the plan to implement a allowable relationship between housing and office as the precise plan gets built out, with the ability to put in not updates, but you know, like reviewing the current status of the precise plan and updating as needed for an additional 5 years or 10 years, whatever we determine is a reasonable, probably 10 years. I'm thinking 5 is way too. We'll just bear.
I'd say instead of
It took us
time-
5 years to get this far.
I
Yeah.
would say instead of time, I would say like either the site area when 30% of the land is taken redevelopment, or when 50% of the land is taken redevelopment. Like I would rather define on that matrix than time, because what if our downtown really takes off with part coming and everyone wants to come and do a development application in the same year? So, I would rather define it in a metrics where we know we really want to start checking it than time-based metrics.
Well, I'll be honest, I really want to start checking it before the city entitles all their land, because that's what we have the most control over.
Mhm.
I mean, I'll be honest, like
Very
50% of the city land, when 50% of the city land has been allocated or released for entitlements, at that point, there needs to be a check, because if we don't hold on to pieces of it to catch whatever the developers don't end up picking up, we might end up needing to turn that into open space, the theater, whatever it may be. But if we sell our land off first, we're gonna have to buy it back at a lot, much steeper price. So I don't want to. I'd be down for that. I think that's a reasonable. That way, it's not set in stone for time, but it's set in stone for when we potentially are losing some of our ability to recover.
Does it make sense to, because there's a lot here, there's a lot to unpack. Does it make sense to really devote, another meeting largely to implementation and phasing,
Mhm.
and allow this to just be
Mhm.
left with, okay, there's some really good ideas percolating about phasing and implementation and monitoring. But what we need to do now is have an overall amount of development associated with a building form program that the city council can look at, and that can can be the basis for environmental review.
Okay.
Yeah, I think
And
that's a
Atisha,
good idea.
sorry. And Atisha, I was just thinking, if you tie it to the city land, then that means in the private sector, anybody who has private land can continue on before and keep moving through before there's a potential revision to the plan, because the marker is the city land being consumed.
But I don't know how much land use can we control on city land because of the Surplus Land Act. We
I
are pretty
agree.
subject to
I-
only housing projects on that. So if you want to cap office, then if we see like Prometheus and Swenson both coming in doing housing projects, then we are left with very limited control to bring any office.
Yeah.
So just kind of, trade-offs of, I would say like once we have 1,500 housing units, the screen I'm seeing, I would say, once we reach 500 housing units, we revisit how we are
Yeah.
doing.
I would encourage not, if you're trying to make a motion now, I would encourage you not to go too specific on these mechanisms. Just, it's more about these general proportions that we've defined, the overall maximums for housing and office, this sort of 50-50 proportion that these numbers reflect as what you guys are signing off on for council review. And then, then we really need to take a deeper dive into these triggers and mechanisms.
So if we can make a motion, how about if we make a motion that the numbers of the low and high end for housing and office and retail, we agree with, but we feel that there's further discussion needed on the implementation and control measures within the plan to create a balance of these, these items that make up the whole.
Yeah, a balance as you go, right?
As you
phase
go,
by
somehow.
phase.
And
Yeah.
we don't know what that control measure is at this point, but we
Yep.
want to have a further discussion on the control measure and the frequency and what the control measure is, right? But
Yep.
we agree with the high end, the low end, and basically the ingredients, right?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay, so I'll make a motion, or does somebody else want to make the motion? I feel like I've been kind of talking about it, so it's probably easier. Make a motion that we agree with the overall plan components, the mix shown on this slide, but we want to have a further discussion of implementation of control measures and checkpoints and how that will be managed.
I'll second.
Thanks. All in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed? All right, the ayes carry. Thank you, Peter and David and Jim and Tisha.
So
Great-
Chair, we do
Great
need to go.
discussion.
We do need to go to public comment next for this item.
Okay. We'll go to public comment. I see one hand. Oh, two hands. We'll go Jonathan. Saw your hand first.
Jonathan, you should be able to go ahead and talk.
Hi, is this audio coming through?
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I'm a little disappointed I didn't get to make this comment before we voted. But my name is Jonathan Evans. I'm the president of the Old Quad Residents Association. And I had some concerns, and there's some talking up there about bulldozing or tearing down historic homes, or we're going to do a lot of redevelopment. And the historic nature of the downtown and some of the homes within it, including like the Cole House on the corner of Homestead and Monroe, are really important to the community, and preserving both the historic context of the homes and the homes themselves are important. And so what is it about this, how this plan works, that actually guarantees protections for historic homes, both within the downtown plan itself and the homes surrounding the downtown, where we do have plenty of those? And thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. So do we have, can we answer that now? Is there a,
Well, I think, just briefly, I think that this plan focuses on these specific blocks. So if there need to be mechanisms to protect historic fabric and surrounding blocks, that would need to be the subject of another plan or a general plan amendment. I think this plan can only affect the blocks that are within this plan area. And then with regard to the historic homes that are within this plan area, which is the ones here that we're seeing on block I and J, I think the spirit of the question is exactly what we were talking about before, which is how do we place those incentives in the plan that would, that would encourage these homes to be retained as part of the fabric and allow them to transfer their development rights to other parts of the downtown where we want that density.
May I add, I don't think that these homes are actually designated historic.
Some of them are.
Are they some of these? Okay.
Yeah.
We looked on the city website and didn't see that, but maybe we were looking at the wrong place.
most of them are, one
I
of them.
can get it for you.
Yeah, is registered. A few of them are actually registered under the Mills Act. One is registered under the county as historical designation, and the others are, a few of the others are actually, they could be considered. So
Eligible.
eligible. Thank you. I was looking for the word. Thank you,
Yeah.
Rob.
They'll be in the general plan.
Yeah.
There's the historic inventory within the general plan.
Eligible.
Yeah.
Thank you, Rob.
Sure.
I wanted to mention that this was a hot topic in the joint committee meeting that we had recently. And I think Dave Sargent was very eloquent in explaining that the verbiage would be put into the form-based code on many levels, not just to protect the historic nature of the homes, but also any construction that's near these homes, whether it be 100 feet, 200 feet, would reflect the historic nature of those homes. And I was very satisfied with that answer. So is that still an option for us as we're working through this form-based code?
Yes, I think right from the very first, starting with the kickoff meeting we had a couple of years ago, we were focused on the importance of ensuring that new buildings across Homestead and across Benton from the historic neighborhoods should have characteristics of scale, form, frontage, and other character defining elements that rendered them compatible with, not matching, but compatible with and good neighbors across the street. And then in the case of the little block between Madison and Block J, there are, in addition to there being potential new buildings across the street, there's potential new buildings right next door. So we would certainly include in the code requirements that they not be too much taller or more massive or scaled in ways that make them look out of place near those homes. So yeah, we intend to include scale and character and frontage criteria for homes that are nearby and across the street. Excuse me, for new buildings that are nearby and across the street from these homes. But not to require them to, you know, mimic an old house.
I think we're seeing in the model right now an attempt already.
Yeah,
to
absolutely.
Scale, right?
Yeah, no, at a massing model level already, yeah, WRT has done a great job of this.
Oh, yeah, only the, yeah.
I
the
mean,
bonus- the
I
bonus
think
is
a
fine.
good example is just like most of these houses, some of them are 1.5 story or 2 story. Because there's a limit with historic, you know, houses, it's 25 feet right now, and some of them probably exceed that. So really going one more story would be the limit that I would want personally as an architect next to a historic resource, you know, and that's it. I mean, so it's what you're showing in the model, but we probably need something strong language in there to protect that, right?
That would be in the code, yes.
Okay, thank you. That's what I was interested in hearing. Once again, thank you, Dave.
Well, thank you very much for your nice remarks.
Is there something within this precise plan that we can protect these historical resources? I mean, the other one that is also shown in this image, right, is the post office. And I think, you know, we haven't talked, you know, anything about it. Obviously, it's a federal building, but, you know, this post office in particular has been, you know, almost closed once before and barely retained. And so is there a mechanism within the precise plan to take a very strong stance against, you know, specific historical assets to the neighborhood? I mean, this is not the majority of the 10 blocks, right? I mean, and I don't want to get really stuck on it, but
sadly, no.
This city, well, that's great. This city has had, unfortunately, you know, not the best history. That's why we're all here, with leveling resources at the time they think it's a good idea, only to look back and go, man, I wish we would have put a little bit more thought into that. And I think that is what is kind of the concern, and I know will be a huge concern. And this is going to be probably the issue that I see that will debunk the whole plan at council when the residents come out with pitchforks, if there is no strong protection of the historical resources within and abruptly adjacent to that plan, you know, this plan. So I don't want to end up like that, you know, the El Camino Real plan where everybody comes out at the end, but this will be the big issue, this and height. So, but I actually think this is going to be the bigger issue.
I agree. I think that the whole point of the form-based code was, well, what was intriguing for me, especially being an HLC person, that we can put that language in there and it can be strong. And so that's what I'm banking on with this form-based code is those level of protection. And I heard that at the joint committee meeting. So I'm a believer, and I really want that to be included in this whole form-based code. That's why I'd buy in for that reason alone.
So I guess WRT, I'd like to see what we can do. We do have a historical preservation ordinance, but it doesn't have a lot of teeth.
No.
And so I think, you know, for the post office and these groupings of housings, it's not a large area of the 10 block.
Yeah.
But I really do think it adds value and character and you know, will be sorely missed if we just plow it over.
Good. This was very helpful.
Yeah, really good comments.
Chelsea, there's one hand raised for
All
public
right, so
comment?
yeah, we should go back to the public comments. Sorry, we kind of went off with Jonathan's comments, sorry. Mary Grizzle.
Go ahead, Mary.
My question is also on Block J regarding the grouping of houses. And are we talking about putting on rules or regulations that will prevent those homes from ever being sold? And
Can't do that.
No, yeah, not being sold.
they can't be sold.
Well,
No,
No,
we
we
can't-
can't
tell somebody
control
they
that.
can't. You can't regulate somebody's ability to transfer a real estate asset.
Okay, but what I want to say is, I don't understand why that group of homes there cannot be treated like the Franklin Mall. When and if they can remain until when and if they're sold and somebody wants to plow them over or move them. That's what I don't understand. Are we protecting those homes forever and ever? Or are we going, why can't that be treated like the Franklin Mall, where in say 8 years or 10 years down the road, if the owners were designing that area for them in the event that they sell, right? Why can't we do the same here?
Well, you
We
could.
can, I mean, you can
Mhm.
wait for the home to be sold and then to have a proposal come up for that parcel. What we're talking about, Mary, is putting in some language that they, that doesn't allow them to just disregard the historical nature of the structure, the existing structure that's there, and just bulldoze it over, or demolition by neglect, which we've also seen in this neighborhood over and over again. And so putting something in place that shows respect for the existing structures and takes into heavy consideration either moving or removing a structure that it has an historical designation or historically could be significant, prior to just bulldozing it over.
Okay, I
Ultimately,
agree.
like
Putting
David said,
protect-
I don't think there's anything that we can stop and hold tight, although I think you can for like the post office, right? For commercial building stuff like we did for
Well,
Century
if the-
21 is considered historical.
Well, but if the federal government owns it, can you tell them they can't knock it down and build a new post office?
I don't know, they can tell us
You-
what to do with our infrastructure.
You can.
Well, nobody said it's fair.
No, guys, I understand you. I understand that you want to put safeguards while those homes are there. But I think that we should design the area just like we do the rest of the downtown, including the Franklin Mall. That's what I'm saying.
Okay.
And you can have the protections there until and if and when.
That brings up a lot of very interesting points that we'll discuss and bring back to you at another time.
Yeah, thank you, Mary.
All right, thank you.
Very, very good points.
Patricia?
Go ahead, Patricia.
Hey guys, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. So I understand there's going to be some sort of rezone like for the area, and like within the 10 block area, there are definitely some historic protections for some of the houses, and at least one of the houses actually under HT zoning, which is a special zoning that grants the historic protection for the property. Will that get rezoned during this process, or are we going to leave that zoning alone? Oh, and also like for some of that properties, like if we want to scale to protect those houses, I'm wondering like if changing some of the proposal to like townhomes would be better, because like I saw like it was actually more feasible on the economics over there instead of like doing towers. So that's it.
Thank you, Patricia.
I
good
can
point.
say, yeah,
agree.
I haven't looked to see which, in that detail, you know, what the exact zoning designations are in the boundaries. So when we actually implement our form-based code, that would be something we could consider.
You know, maybe this side where it butts up to residential, you know, if you continue down past outside of the precise plan to the plan left that we're showing, there's quite a few work-live units along Franklin down to the Carmelite. I mean, maybe
Yep.
this is a place that those townhomes would work with, still a retail component on the bottom where you can buy your, you know, buy your home and your place of business and still make it work, and it adds value and it brings a non-franchise business to the area and still has respect for the homes.
Yeah, live work is a really good transition between neighborhood and downtown.
I should say work live, because there is a difference.
There, I know
I have
there
to
is.
correct myself.
No,
work live.
Oh yeah. Actually, a good friend of mine in Oakland has been doing this for like 25 years, and there's a lot of different flavors.
So I guess maybe we can look at that. Maybe that's something that
Yes.
could help as well here.
I agree. I
So
agree.
for which block frontages, Adam?
Along Franklin and these two last
On-
blocks. I mean,
On I and J?
yeah,
along Franklin?
I&J.
So like you would hold the corner there at Monroe.
I would hold the corner because I
and
think
then
that, yeah.
step down to more of a
And-
townhome form as you get
And-
farther west on the block.
And maybe it's a unique mix. Maybe it's, you know, 2 apartments and a work unit down, you know, or something, you know, it doesn't have to be the traditional way we think of it, you know, we think of it, but I still think it should be something more where it's not a huge envelope block apartment building with some retail below. I think there should be some kind of transition. And I
Mhm.
think that would be a nice transition into what's already there, which is those work live just down the street.
These bottom 2 blocks are very tricky. We're going to have to look at them harder than we have to look at the rest.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, that's definitely worth some study. Now I'm thinking about council in 2 weeks. So, you know, I think we have to say that these blocks are still under study.
Yes.
And that some really good points came up in our last task force meeting, both with the task force and the public comment, specifically associated with block I and J, and that we need to take a closer look at that, and that we'll come back with some recommendations.
Yep. Because there's a lot of this can pretty much be decided at the massing model and plan level, but when you get down to this finer grained stuff, the work on the code is going to inform the plan, and the work on the plan is going to inform the code, and the work on the economics is going to inform both. So yeah, further study, I think, is a very clear way to describe that. And it's going to relate to careful analysis of the existing zoning, like parcel by parcel in some cases.
I would like to see if we can designate some buildings, if there is a mechanism to designate them, like Patricia, I think had mentioned HT or historical, so we don't just give a blanket zoning and make sure that they're, you know, they retain their ambiance, right? I mean, like the post office it's the last building it's the only building that survived. So it'd be nice to let it live the rest of its life and be repurposed as is. I think the community, it would be kind of the last little heart that has kind of remained. Kept it on life support for a long time.
Very nicely said.
Okay.
It's the beating heart.
Thanks.
Okay, those are all the hands we have raised.
That is, any other public comments? Going once, twice. All right, we'll close public comments. I guess we'll move on to, well, I lost it. I guess I gotta find it now.
We do have item 2.
Item 2, update
Leslie,
on.
I'm gonna drop off now. It's,
Thank you, Tisha.
All right,
thank you
thanks,
guys
Tisha.
and good luck. I'll be in the public watching as much as I can next week. Do
Well,
reach out.
congratulations and all the best.
Congratulations,
Tisha.
good luck.
Thank you. Bye.
See you,
Hi,
Tisha.
Tisha.
Do I need to be excused or something? Somewhat.
No, but I will note that you've left the meeting at 8:03.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Bye, Tricia.
All right, so item number 2 on the agenda this evening is update on the release of the online community survey.
Yeah, so this one's mine. It's a quick one. I sent the draft to the task force this week to take a final look at. The task force had commented on this a number of months ago, and we're finally ready to put it out. Most of the content of the survey is based off of your meeting in June, and this will go out early next week to the community, and will be up for probably about 3 weeks. To get responses on that placemaking content as well as on our preferred land use plan. So I just want to put it out there for the task force if there's any comments or questions on that.
Anyone from the task
Amen.
force?
I was able to go through and I really thought it was super user friendly and very creative, good ideas. And I thought it was probably the best one I've seen so far, survey
Oh,
wise.
good.
So well done.
Thanks, Anna. Thanks, Anna. Thank you, WRT.
I'll be honest, Leslie, I've not had time to go through it. Can I go through it tomorrow and give you comments through email? I've been busy at
Yes,
work.
but you're
I saw you,
limited.
I tried to get to it before the meeting, but I'm like, I just didn't have time. I'll be
Yeah,
honest,
you're limited to 2 comments,
I failed.
no more
2,
than 10 words each.
200. She's gotten my comments before. All right, anybody else?
Okay.
Chen.
Yeah, so I was able to click through the survey. And the one thing that kept happening was when I would click on like the tiles that showed the different plans, when you click on home, it doesn't go back to the survey. It goes back to like the homepage for the whole project. So I don't know if that would just confuse people or they're like, wait, I thought I was at the survey. So I think if the clicking on the home, or maybe there's a different button that says go back to the homepage or go back to the survey, but
okay.
I think that could deter people from like actually completing the survey if it redirected them to a completely different page.
All right, we'll look into that. Thank you.
Other
Anyone else?
comments? Must have been good.
Great. Okay.
Thank you.
So I guess we should see if there's any
All right.
public comment on this item.
Did this go out to the public yet? It hasn't. right?
It has not, no,
It has
but
not. So,
I guess
but
they
we
could
should.
comment on the update.
All right, so is there anyone from the public who'd like to comment on the online survey that has not been released yet, but will be shortly? All right,
I see
seeing
no
no
one.
hands, we'll move on to item, oh, I see a hand. Jonathan?
Oh, wait, oh. He keeps
Hello?
moving.
Gonna let everybody talk.
Hello. Hey, just wanted to comment. Please send when you have the survey ready, please send it out, and I'll make sure to get it out to the community members for Okra. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Jonathan.
Thank you.
All right, seeing no more hands, I think we can close this item out and we can move on to item number 3, which is introduction of work on the form-based code, zoning code for the downtown precise plan.
I believe we'll turn that over to David.
David.
Okay. Am I was clicking, am I able to share my screen?
You should be able to, yes.
Oh, hello. Hello. I knew that. I dragged my other window out of the way so I could see your shining faces. Okay, so now you're seeing my desktop with the funny shapes on it.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, we're gonna go, this is a lot shorter than the one we did last time. So this is just gonna be a sort of a quick overview. I hope most of the time we can spend in discussion rather than me talking. So the I just actually, oh good heavens, excuse me. I knew there was something wrong there. There we go. I had the wrong presentation open. No wonder it looked like the old presentation. Excuse me. We were editing a couple of these today. I apologize for the wait. I thought I'd been so clever and downloaded it to my desktop, but I downloaded the wrong one. Give me about 30 more seconds and we're out of here. Saving it to my desktop so this doesn't happen to us again. I did this all before, but it was the other file. I apologize. Okay, here we go. So just a quick highlights of the differences between conventional zoning and form-based codes. A few key points about what we just heard about what the downtown plan is trying to make. And then just a couple, I'm just going to weave in a couple pieces from code we've made for a very similar circumstance recently to help illustrate it. So the reason we have zoning is to prevent grossly dissimilar uses from being next to each other. That's why it was first put in place. The typical outcomes that most zoning, that most cities have, and zoning and plan development sort of work the same way. Or excuse me, they work differently, but they're intended to make the same thing, which is usually it's used as a recipe for regulating low density, auto-dependent suburban development, such as what our state has seen mostly for the last 70 years or so. The primary emphasis of conventional zoning is separating dissimilar land uses, so in order to avoid land use conflicts, we put housing miles away from jobs. And by limiting density and sort of spreading things rather thinly over a lot of land, and then because everybody has to drive everywhere, you got to make sure there's a lot of parking. There's not much connection between land use and urban form and design. When you're making a downtown, it's as we've all been talking about for several years, the starting point is really what kind of a place, what kind of spaces, what kind of environment for people are you making? And that isn't what conventional zoning does. And regulating by FAR and DUA deliver unpredictable outcomes. We've already talked about that a little bit, and I have a simple graphic that'll help illustrate that a little more. But a lot of zoning regulations say that you just limit the amount of development by how many dwelling units you can have on an acre of land, and how many square feet of building you can have on an acre of land. But the typical zoning doesn't say anything about where on the land you put that, except maybe set it back some, or how tall, or what shape it should be, how it should face the public spaces, which of course in a downtown are the most important things. And then when people don't like that, then people start doing plan development overlays and other ways to sort of figure it out one project at a time, because the zoning doesn't make things that anybody likes much. So the exceptions become the rule. The process of designing each project becomes quite a situation with lots of controversy, because nobody's got, the rules aren't set, you're sort of making them up as you go. And the worst thing about that is, even if you end up finally, after all that work, with individual projects that work on their own terms, they tend not to fit together because they're developed according to different logic that was sort of, invented by the planning commission on a given evening. So entitlement by density, density in terms of floor area ratios and square footage limits, height limits, etc. They're very useful things for evaluating economic feasibility. They're necessary things for evaluating potential environmental impacts, but they're not helpful as instructions for making buildings, because if you say the FAR can be 1, is that a 1-story building over the whole lot, or is that a 4-story building on the back quarter of the lot, or a 4-story building on the front quarter of a lot? And in a downtown, of course, that makes all the difference in the world. And the same sort of thing with 2. And so you tend, that's why so many places have, and by the way, the earlier discussion of parking requiring the same area as the building, that's why office parks, as they're euphemistically called, tend to be parking lots with some buildings in them. But if on a 4-story building, which I expect quite a few buildings, at least at the base densities in your downtown, will be, if you have a 4-story building on half the lot, maybe you've got a parking structure on the back half here if the street's over here. You'd have a 0.5 retail FAR. If the rest of the building was office, you'd have a 1.5. But if the upstairs was larger apartments, you might have 40 DUA. But if it was smaller apartments, the exact same building would be 70 DUA. And that's why I'm strongly suggesting that the caps, even the targets, but certainly the caps, not be expressed in DUA, because it might turn out that in order to serve a student population, for instance, or population of younger families and perhaps older couples and who have retired or just want to live or their kids have grown up and moved away, so they want to live in a smaller dwelling in an amenity-rich environment like your downtown will be. You might actually get more units and a higher DUA within the same volume that would actually be a very good match with the environment and perhaps ride transit more than people in larger units would, etc. The other key thing about form-based codes is they can say that the ground floor needs to be designed, thusly, and the uses on the ground floor can be this range of uses, and the uses on the upper floors can be housing or could be office, as opposed to the multifamily housing that we see so much of around the state, where the whole ground floor is just parking with a dead thing, and then housing stacked on top of it. So in the conventional zoning, it tends to have use areas that are connected by big streets that people drive back and forth between where they live and where they work, or where they shop. And it generates environments sort of like this, where it's really, it ends up looking pretty much like places for cars, whereas, downtowns are places for people. So, downtowns need to be a place that you come just because it's so darn nice to be there, even if you weren't planning to buy anything at that moment. This is one of my favorite buildings in the world. It's on the Healdsburg Square in downtown Healdsburg. It's sort of the epitome of a retail frontage. It's got a beautiful sign that expresses the nature of the place. It's easy to read when you're walking along. The windows are tall, absolutely clear. And anyway, it's a pretty nice thing. So in the form-based codes talk about the urban pattern. Now here, the precise plan is very much talking about the urban pattern. It's setting the block structure. It's making sure that the public spaces are ways for not only cars, but pedestrians, bicycles to go through, and it's ensuring that they are pleasant spaces to be in, that they're very habitable, livable public spaces, not just places to drive back and forth. And then the buildings define those spaces by their placement on the lot, by their height, by their massing and their form, by the type of building, whether in this case, these are live work buildings that we built almost 20 years ago that have been performing very well ever since. With the ground floor flexible uses that could be part of what Adam was talking about, where the ground floor could be used as part of the residence if you didn't want to operate a business, or it can be a place to operate a business. And they're also, by the way their frontages are designed, welcoming pedestrians with porches in this case, so that you can sit out there and chat with your neighbors as they go by. And in some cases, style or characteristics of the architecture. Another characteristic that form-based codes normally are centered on is that the open spaces other than streets aren't just so many acres that you had to provide of open space, but they're very specifically designed outdoor rooms that are related in their design and their function and their purpose and their nature to the surrounding uses to provide a community activity outdoor room enlivened by and served by the surrounding uses. And this is a beautiful illustration that our friend Steve Price made, illustrating that, thought of a different way, this intersection of two big streets with a lot of apartments here. If you were thinking about it from the standpoint of the nature of the space, you know, it could be this, with activated ground floors and pedestrian crossings and active corners and landscape that helps to define comfortable shaded walkways for people. So it's really about, it's starting with the space rather than starting with the buildings as objects. So in this case, that's exactly what you all and we all have been working on, is thinking of Franklin Street very much as a very important series of rooms, each block being perhaps thought of as a room. This central square at Main and Franklin conceived of as a central gathering space for the entire community. And with the nature of these frontages being conceived, these being conceived as residential scale frontages across the street from the houses, these dark black lines being conceived of absolutely as retail, restaurant, theater, art gallery, active downtown frontages. Some of these others would be conceived of as retail ready. I'll show you a diagram of that in a minute. Basically, they're able to be, if initially there isn't enough retail to fill them all up with successful businesses, they would be designed in a way that could be converted to that use later without major reworking of the building. And then, of course, the model that we've been looking at, the role of the code with respect to these spaces is to make sure, well, the design of this street that WRT and we will be collaborating on, and the way that the buildings face it, needs to make it a space that is both connecting and transitioning between the houses on the one side and the new buildings on the other. Same on Homestead. Clearly, Lafayette and Monroe are incredibly important streets that need to look, feel, and operate like a downtown, be very much crossable by pedestrians from the university and from the neighborhoods, well, between these blocks on the south. But they're incredibly important in terms of feeding customers and, you know, money. They're pumping money in and out of this downtown. And of course, both Monroe and Benton and Franklin are very critically important, connecting the downtown up to the BART, Caltrain, Amtrak, and the the large mixed use development that's happening up against that. And El Camino Real, which has been underperforming for a very long time in that stretch. Ironically, the El Camino Real plan didn't address that piece that cuts the university off from the train station. But at some point that needs to be addressed. But in any case, these streets are these are the arteries in the sense of like your blood, your sense of a body. These are the arteries that bring the blood, the people, the trade, the money that is going to make this heart pump. And then these intersections of Lafayette and Maine and Monroe are going to need to be thought of very carefully in terms of how the buildings make those spaces, and of course how the buildings make this core space. So it'll have a huge amount to do with the nature of the frontages and the massing, which I'll show you a little bit about as we finish this little spiel here, and then I want to hear from you folks. As we've discussed before, yeah, so this diagram that WRT made is so beautiful. It emphasizes once again the importance of plugging this, basically plugging, if you think of this as like a printed circuit board, actually. So this is a new, this is a new CPU here, and it needs to be plugged into the circuit board so that it connects to the whole rest of the circuit here. And this diagram that shows how the historic radiating streets that were built out through the plum orchards well, first there was the mission, then there was the university, then there was the town, and the old quad. And that was all that was out here except trees, for a long, long time. So they just ran roads out from it into the orchards. And that structure could be now taken advantage of by perhaps putting some landmarks where you can see them as you're coming into town, so that people realize that, once again, the heart, she's beating. And the example that I love Oakland a lot. So the example I showed before was you've got San Pablo, Broadway and Telegraph coming in to the center where you can see the Tribune Tower. And you've also got the beautiful example of the roof sign on the Grand Lake Theater that you can see from all around the lake. And so, slender and or illuminated elements rising from a couple key points here, whether it might be this corner where the existing building is, this corner, which actually terminates the views of a couple of streets coming into town, this corner that we've talked about so much already, even this corner, not that this building should be very high, but maybe there would be something visible on it, could really start to put your little downtown back on the map for everybody. And then I put this slide in here just so we could talk about the importance of scaling down from the core down toward the neighborhood. I think we've covered that topic, so I won't say any more about it right now. So the elements that are regulated by a form-based, so basically most zoning just covers land use, density, and setbacks and heights. But the form-based code discusses the building placement and how the buildings are massed, not just how big they are, how big they look. Building heights, the nature of frontages, those are the main topics that I'm going to show you. And then there's a lot of other important ones. The extent to which on-site open space, whether it's courtyards on the ground or terraces in the air. Parking, of course, allowed uses, signage. And the street designs and public open space are going to be covered in the precise plan, really, not in the code. And so the mechanics include parking and uses, and they're covered in great detail. Some people think that form-based codes don't regulate use. Of course they do. They just talk about a lot of topics in addition to use. So Jim already showed this image. So the massing of buildings, the scale of buildings is terribly important in historic downtowns, including yours. A lot of the buildings had architecture that was organized in certain widths based usually on the original lotting of the downtown. Most California downtowns were platted in 25-foot lots. So getting buildings, even if they look nothing like a historic building, you see these buildings are reflecting horizontal and vertical increments that organize them into imageable sort of small city or town scale pieces rather than just being big boxy things. So that's the characteristic that we will pursue in this code. Also, you can generate scale with projecting out elements over the sidewalks, whether they're galleries or arcades. And then there's the matter of house form massing, which is certainly a strategy we would recommend, and we probably will recommend as we fade the neighborhood toward the south end of the property. This is actually a 3-story building with underground parking, but it looks pretty compatible with the bungalows that happen to be across the street from this building, because it has an eave line that's sort of a low 2-story scale. And the 3rd floor is disguised as roof by virtue of dormers, which, you know, a technique that's been around for hundreds and hundreds of years. So if you're near houses, you can mass this, you know, this is nothing else but an apartment building. That's an apartment building too, but this is an apartment building that goes well with the buildings of the downtown core. This is an apartment building that goes well with the houses across the street. So we define, and this is for one very specific situation, but along edges where older, smaller buildings are present, you can define horizontal massing and building articulation, facade increments. This is just 1-2-story building, but it can, and we don't advocate, you know, the Disneyland approach to make it look like, you know, a whole bunch of buildings that were built, you know, 600 years ago. But just by the way the windows are organized and the entry doors are organized and the way the shop front openings are organized, you can give buildings a scale in addition to a size that conveys horizontal and vertical increments that have a relation to either the buildings that were there before the downtown was raised and or buildings that are still there across the street. Frontages are probably the most important single topic. Frontages are what you walk past. Frontages are what you walk in and out of. Frontages are what you perceive when you're not tipping your head back looking up to see how tall the buildings are. They're the walls of these outdoor rooms that people walk past all the time and reach out and touch. So a lot of the code is going to focus on making shop fronts that are tall enough to bring light and air into the space and provide beautiful indoor spaces for restaurants and shops, and that have very clear glass, that so you can see what you're walking past, and usually some kind of shading over the top so that the glare of the sun doesn't leave you looking at your own reflection, you know, like a pigeon. And there's certainly the possibility in our benign California climates of having some shop fronts that just open right up to make indoor outdoor space. Well, actually, so in all cases, a lot of the intention is to sort of blur the line between indoor and outdoor so that as you're walking past, you see in, and when you're in the space, you see people walking past. This is taking it to the next level with openable shop fronts to let people indoors have basically let people do outdoor dining indoors, and to allow life to spill out onto the sidewalk, making the sidewalk in front and the room inside really all part of the public space with, you know, that you can activate. And then in terms of retail ready frontages, you can have buildings with tallish ceilings and large openings that can initially, if there's no businesses that want these spaces, you can have small semi-private yards made with fences or landscaping. This could be an office and you could visit with clients out here, or this could be a residence and you could visit with your neighbors out here. And at some point, if the market develops to the point where there's more market for commercial and restaurant uses, you just take those little fences out and boom, you got stores. This is one of the live work frontages in Hercules that we did, you know, in the aughts. And some of them were initially occupied as just part of the residence, but a lot of small businesses have moved in here. And now the larger mixed use center is finally under construction a couple of blocks away from here. And here's another way to do it with an arcade that you just put planters here. And then you take them out and boom, you've got shops. And the way we code these is, so this is the Claremont plan we did, but on this plan, we can certainly highlight those frontages that Jim and his team have been coloring red all this time. And certain ones of those the only uses that would be permitted in there would be true retail commercial. You could also allow office, which would be better than an empty space. And then some of these purplish colors here indicate where the retail ready, the sort of convertible frontages we just talked about, would be required. So even if they're housing for the first 5 or 10 or 15 years, they could be converted to commercial frontages without serious demolition of the buildings. And then the frontage, then we'd code we'll probably advance these further for you guys, but we just have shop fronts, which are just the normal big windows with some shading device. Recessed shop fronts are an intriguing sort where you can get an outdoor dining space under roof, sort of in the ante room leading into the restaurant. And then you could have arcades that come out over the sidewalk where you actually have upper floors. Well, now this will be a question we'll need to talk about, whether or where we might want this or not. This can allow the building face to come out very close to the back of curb, which in some contexts is useful to sort of narrow the space of the street. But if these buildings are going to be very tall, maybe you don't want to both narrow it this way and narrow it by making buildings taller. Galleries would be like the one I showed you from Folsom, or it could be more modern like this, where it's basically a roofed sidewalk. Then we code the different retail ready types, and the total frontage includes the public frontage, which is the sidewalk and the landscape strip and the parking lane. We call that the public frontage, and that's going to mostly be defined in the plan by Jim and his team. And then the code will define mostly from the sidewalk on back, where there's a setback, or just the building facade if there is no setback. But they have to be tightly coordinated, and that's one of that's the value of working on the plan and the code at the same time. Then there's different residential frontage types. There's the old-fashioned stoops that require a vertical displacement that doesn't accommodate wheelchair accessibility. So it works for single family types better than it works for housing for multifamily types. But you can also have a corridor that additionally accesses this unit. And then a lot of buildings would just have a lobby and just apartments, ideally whose windowsills would be above eye level as you're walking along the street. So you'd go into the lobby and then probably up a few stairs or a ramp to a floor level that was a bit above the street to provide an appropriate degree of privacy for the ground floor residents. And then so we'd code different residential frontage variations, porches, stoops, terraces, etc. That's it. I didn't want to go long on that. I just want the most important topics are the massing and facade articulation, which are basically the walls of the outdoor room that will be Franklin Street, that will be the central square, that will be any of your streets. And then the nature of the frontages, basically, what are you walking past, and how is, excuse me, I buried a very important point. a key element of both the frontages and all the facade articulation is that there be windows that are overlooking the streets to give the eyes on the street, as Jane Jacobs always said. That's what makes this place safe, secure, comfortable 18, 20 hours a day, is the fact that there's people in the residences, there's people in the businesses, there's people in the offices who are looking out over the street so that the place feels lived in all the time. Okay, anyway, so, and I'd love to hear any questions or thoughts that you guys have about what's most important to make sure we cover.
Hey, David, just a real quick one, Adam, before you open up with your group. On this slide here with the arcades and galleries, I just wanted to point out that, you know, we've started to have a really interesting discussion about finding a logic for where these appear, you know, according to south-facing street walls. And I think that could be something that could really add a nice layer to Franklin Street in particular, but it could also turn corners maybe in some places. And, you know, even on this arcade that you see here, that upper floor could also be an open porch, right? A covered porch.
Oh, totally.
And get that other layer of, you know, dining seating up there that's looking down over the street. So I think that's just really exciting to think about that language and how it plays out, you know, along Franklin and you know, turn some of the corners.
We've got, well, as we start developing the code, we'll show you a lot more examples. There's some beautiful examples in Celebration, Florida, near the lake, of exactly what you just said, which is tall arcades on top of which are terraces or porches, which that gives this sort of, that just activates the street in a whole nother way.
Yeah.
You've got a whole nother layer of life going on up there that's looking down. I mean, good grief, New Orleans has been doing this very well for a couple or 300 years. The French Quarter, I mean, talk about lively. And I think it's obvious, but in this sort of a case, these columns are instead of, not in addition to, street trees. So you would have if Franklin Street in general has street trees and street lights lining it to create that spatial separation between the pedestrian realm and the cars, and to sort of to soften and close the space, that would be replaced by arcades or galleries in certain places. And in general, we think that sort of a rich, reasonably well organized variety is what's going to make this downtown feel like a real downtown, not a project. But so the code is really creates the code, it provides the chess pieces that are you know, with which the game is played, and then it turns out, you know, how it turns out based on each building doing what it wants within the prescribed limits. And that can give you some really authentic variation and variety while still providing a good deal of spatial continuity. Okay, that's it.
All right, so I'll open it up to the DCTF members. I see Rob's hand. Rob, you want to go ahead?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hi, thanks. Yeah, I just have 4 points. The first one was that you had a block form slide.
Yeah.
Could you bring that one up?
Maybe. Probably.
With the more of the podium on the left and the more traditional downtown
yes
block fronts. The issue I have, that's the left slide, I'm just going to tell you, makes me cringe because
it makes us all cringe. Yes.
Okay, because you know, podium construction is everything that's being built right now, and it has it loses that soul of the 25-foot modularity, right? That you guys had it there earlier, but I don't know where it went.
Yeah, is this it?
No, it's the one with the horizontal yellow podium.
I see, excuse me. Oh, God, I don't, oh, no, I'm, okay. Oh, I know where that is now. It's when I started talking about massing.
Right. And my fear about it is that's exactly what most developers are doing now with the 5/2 or sometimes 6/2 in terms of podium construction. And podium construction.
That one.
Yeah. So I struggle with that because that yellow line, and I don't want our downtown to feel like a podiums. I want it to feel like the right side. So
no, we agree completely. Yeah, there's some. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm not saying that you can't have a yellow band for that first 2 buildings that you see on the corner and it's broken and it's like more like a canopy or some strong element, but the fact that that carries down the whole block and then they just articulate above, just, you know, and I might feel different about it, David, if it was that banding was up another 2 stories. So it looked like a 3-story frontage of an old town that then they added on top of that, right? A 2/3 or something like that. Okay.
Let me see here. Built more. Yeah. So. You know, I mean, now that's a way to do a base.
Yeah, and it's still strange with those big cutouts. I get why it exists. It's a beautiful building, no doubt. I mean, you can feel the.
Well, it was from the days when that's what you had to do in order to be able to breathe in the room.
Yeah, right.
Have air conditioning.
Yes, got it. But, no, it's a beautiful building.
It's just we know it so well.
Yeah,
but that facade increment comes all the way to the ground here. That's the difference.
Yeah. See that. So I mean, if you, I just popped this up because if you're going to do a base element, that's how to do it. And then this isn't. This is the new building across the street, where they're just into doing these sort of, they just do lines to do lines instead of fractured. It's a totally different creature.
Yeah. No, okay. It just slides like that. It's important that if we have a slide in there, because the developer will just eat that one up, that other slide.
I believe me when I tell you that building is not going to be in the code.
Okay, good.
I just grabbed that because WRT had it in one of their presentations and it illustrated the idea of the scale of the pieces. But no, I couldn't agree with you more, Rob.
Oh, okay, perfect. The other one is the dormers, which is a great example. There's a lot of old houses in the quad that are, you call it a 1.5 story, and it's the live-in attic. And I would say I wouldn't necessarily say that that's only reserved for more of a residential component, because my wife's family is from Latvia, and in Riga, there's a lot of 5, 6, 7-story buildings, modern ones and old ones, that have done a dormered live-in attic to cut down the mass but still get that extra, and that helps with shading and other components. So I wouldn't necessarily rule that out in terms of an opportunity to throw another floor but cut down on some shading. And then the stoops, dealing with this on a residential level, the stoops, all these old houses, a lot of them have great porches and that you can actually sit on. And so I want them to be functional as well as aesthetic. So, so that's just an important thing for me. And then the arcades, I like the idea. I do think that their benefit could be possibly on the western exposure, right? They will help shade. Well, you can use trees obviously to shade businesses from the western sun, but
Uh-huh.
I think the key is to get that height right. So it's not feeling too restrictive and it works with the scale of the promenade or walking down the street.
Yeah, they need to be pretty tall.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, we always say that 12 feet is like the dead minimum,
Yeah,
but 15, 18, 20 is better.
yeah, exactly. That was all I had, but otherwise, thank you. Yeah,
Oh, cool. Well, Rob, I always look forward to your comments.
thanks.
Professional to professional, and thank you for those.
Sure, it's been a great experience for me.
Oh, yeah, likewise.
Thank you, Rob. Is there any other DCTF member that would like to comment, ask questions before we go to the public? I'll just say, David. Oh,
I
go
did
ahead.
want to, yeah, Anna here. I
Oh,
did want to
I
commend
don't
on
see
the
your hand. Sorry.
frontages. I think that was super important. A lot of folks say, I don't like Santana Row because it's just big boxy buildings. But when you're going there and you're at the street level, none of that feels big and boxy
Right.
to me.
Yeah.
All I care about is I'm
Yeah.
enticed by every single frontage that I'm walking past. And it's
There you go.
exactly what you're describing. It's very clear windows. There's accordion doors wide open that are saying, come on in here, and I agree, some of the architecture people don't find it that exciting above the frontages, but everything is
not.
happening at the street level and I'm happy with it.
Yeah. That's actually a pretty. We're working on a project in Southern California where people have been mentioning places they like to go as precedents, and several people have mentioned Santana Row, so we've been showing pictures of it. It's a very odd hybrid. I mean, the ground level experience was beautifully designed by very skillful architects, and then the housing upstairs was basically a lot of it was sort of a suburban townhouse project that was plunked down on the roof of a mall.
Exactly.
Because actually, I think well, never mind. But that, yeah. So yes, but people aren't walking around, like this mostly.
Never.
They're paying attention to what they're going past, and what they're going past is very beautiful in Santana Row. It's very skillfully designed.
So your ideas for frontages are fantastic. I also lived in Pasadena for 10 years and I loved the downtown there as well. And the little alleys and the nooks and crannies, I would turn a corner and I'd be like, oh, I gotta go here. And the frontages were, again, very enticing. I hardly ever noticed what was above because they got it so right at the ground floor.
Yeah, I mean, people are, and one of the things that's just stunned me from the start in dealing with you good folks in Santa Clara was the lack of paranoia about height. Maybe that's more of a Southern California thing. But nobody cares if it's a 3-story building or a 4. They care maybe if it's 12, but nobody cares if it's 3 or 4 or 5 really, as long as the ground floor is beautiful.
Exactly. Yes.
So yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Dan, go ahead.
Yeah, it's funny. My point was on Santana Row too, the
Oh,
dreaded
what?
Santana Row. That to that point, I think the frontages are, what you showed a couple nights ago, and again, you did a great job of that, and again here too. That's the key, is the experience, the pedestrian experience, and how they're feeling. But I think what they did, and I think, Adam and I had a walk down there. What was funny with Santana Row is it is canyon-like as you walk in. And they've got the setbacks, ironically, in the back. So as you go down the main thoroughfare, it's flush, like the storefronts are flush with the facade of the building going up.
Yes.
And but in the back they have setbacks, so I guess the residents can have a semblance of a backyard or what have you. And if they had reversed that even slightly and put some setback in there, I think it would have, been a lot better received by many. But yeah, the frontages are key, and the uniformity of that, and like to your point, you see everything that you want to see when you look in.
Yeah.
Nothing's hidden. It's inviting. So, and my last point is what kills me in this, the pain of Prometheus of that building, is that I think, hate to keep bringing that up, but the north side of Franklin, I think the key, when this thing finally gets done, be it in 10 years, 5 years, or 50 years, the key attraction spot is going to be Franklin and Maine.
Yes.
And we've got that boulder sitting right there. But is,
Waiting
that's
for the punchline.
Well, no, no punchline. It's just
no. I'm not saying that about you. I'm talking about the situation we're all in.
Oh, I know. But that's where the sun's going to hit. And I think that's where people are really going to gather, is on that north side of Franklin, right where that building is.
Yep.
And, it's so important to have, that gathering space there. So I think that's it. I think I made all my statements the other night, but, hats off. Looks really good.
Well, it's just an approach so far, but it's going to rapidly turn into a document that I think will help make this happen.
Any other DCTF members that would like to comment before we go to the public? Rob, go ahead.
Just real quick. The one thing I was thinking of is when you go to council, what's really helpful, you talked about Ventura and other cities that have benefited from form-based code. And I know there's a building in Ventura, it's on California Street, that I think it's about 5 stories. There's a fish restaurant, and then it's got a TV station above. But that's like showing examples of where the form-based code has been a building has benefited the downtown, examples of that, I think would be helpful.
That's a fascinating story too. I'll give you the super short version.
60 South California Street, right?
I know, that's where we're going.
Okay.
There she is.
Yeah.
So they had originally designed a building that looked nothing like that. It was really quite bad. And they did so right after we had finished the new form-based code for the downtown, or maybe they were working on it like at the same time we were working on the form-based code. So I was under contract with the city as consulting town architect for a few years, doing design review on major projects. So I did a design review on this, and I identified the various ways in which it was not getting it done. And they hired, I think, a different architecture firm, and they came back with this. And I said, well, hallelujah, yes. And then, even more interesting, so the city's parking structure that we built about 15 years earlier was right behind it. And they wanted permission to make a direct bridge connection between the parking structure and this building and lease a block of parking spaces in there. And originally the economic development staff was saying, well, I don't know about that. So the redevelopment manager and I pushed hard to get them to do that. And it's just been incredibly successful. It's got, there's nothing wrong with this build. Well, actually anyway, and right now during COVID, this whole street is closed off to traffic.
Yeah. No, we were there during COVID, and it struck me because I had figured that's the one building that was infilled, because I was looking for buildings there, because I know you were heavily involved with that. So
yeah, this is the best one we got. And so one of the key comments I made is it needs to have a base element that is compatible in height with the 2 one-story buildings adjacent, and they did it. And she works.
Yeah. No.
And then they have a 3-story line here that lines up with this old hotel that I helped them remodel the front of 30 years ago. And so it's talking to the building across the street.
Yeah.
It's talking to the buildings next door.
Yeah.
It's got a tower. Life is good.
Yeah, no,
So it's nice to hear, David, that there was a project and experience with a development that was running concurrently with your plan, and how they both, it helped shape it to the right direction and something that was really viable. Even
Actually,
though
there
with
were
their
two-
first design, it ended up being a better design and
Oh,
better for
way
everybody.
better. There were actually 2 or 3 such projects, and I actually have slides of the before and after that I can show you at a future meeting.
Okay,
Yeah,
that'd be great.
That'd be great. But these are
Yeah.
things that I think council and planning commission what can relate to, where
Yeah.
that story that you're telling is how it can go one direction, or with the smart form-based code, you can relate. It can relate and be
Yep.
relatable. Yeah.
I think Rob, you're right. Examples are always a good thing to show what you would have gotten without form-based code
Yeah.
and what you ended up getting with form-based code, and how it's complementary, and it's
Yeah.
why we're doing all of this. We're not doing it
Exactly.
just for fun.
Yeah.
We have several slides of examples of those from actually from Ventura in a period of like a year and a half.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, Butch.
Thank you. Let's leave that slide up, David. When we're talking about frontage, we keep talking about Franklin Street being the main frontage. And this was this slide is perfect. It brought it up exactly what the point I want to make is, as you walk down this street, it's great frontage. It's trees, it's buildings, it's everything works. But go back to the building you were just on California. Now, we've talked about the nooks and crannies and the side streets. Looking at this alley, this is one thing I would not want us to do, because it's not an inviting place to say, come and discover me. There's things happening down here. And if you can look at the 1-story building, I don't know if we can get the angle to do it, but if you just look down this alley, it would not be a place that would not be a place that would invite me down. So as we start thinking of those cross streets, Main Street, Jackson, and whatever, part of my concern is that we put all our emphasis on Franklin Street and we kind of shortchange the rest of the facades. Now, I know you've mentioned it all along. I just want to make.
Well, this is just an alley. This
no, I understand.
This
no,
isn't I mean, I'll show you a corner building.
No, I understand, but I think
that's how to do a corner building.
Right, David, but that's on a main street. The thing that I'm
this is Main Street. This is Main Street. Yes.
You know, I understand, but I think the devil's in the details.
Yeah.
So if I know we have to have access streets, I know we have to have garbage pickups and things like that. But I think what makes a really interesting downtown is any alleyway you look down, there is some elements, and it could be something just on the facade. It doesn't have to be something that invites you in, but it's something that just doesn't look like this dead alley that I never want to walk down to. I hope that as we look at it, it's an inviting alleyway, no matter where it is in our downtown.
Well,
that's the only point I'm trying to make.
The building could turn, obviously, as an example, that corner building that you're looking at with the boutique could have windows and stuff that turn.
Well, guess what?
It did probably, right?
It did, and they stuccoed them over.
Yeah.
So this is actually just about I've wanted to have my office in this building for years. Underneath all this crap is it's a little jewel of a brick building, and it had a side door and 2 windows, and they ruined it. Anyway.
Right. So there's visual elements there on frontage that makes it interesting. And I think on some towns you go to, it's a developer goes, it's cheap. Let's put the facade on so it looks great, which to me is Disneyland, but look behind the scene and it's all done with smoke and mirrors. There's nothing there.
Well, actually, one of the things about urban buildings is the facades are completely different than the sides and the backs. Right. But I'm not disagreeing with you though, Butch, I mean, this is an old alley and there it is.
Right.
But if here, the good news and the bad news is we got to do everything from scratch.
Right.
So if we're going to do alleys from scratch, we can make them much nicer than this.
Right. Put an element to them.
Absolutely. I agree. Yes. Thank you, Butch.
Pasadena had the most interesting alleys with businesses along, I was just impressed with things that, that the alleys were actually, like you're saying, Butch, more functional and inviting, but maybe it just evolves, or maybe you need some setbacks for parking that they can lose the parking in front at some point. I don't know. Anyway, that's enough.
Or someplace like Boise that has murals all through their alleys in the downtown.
Sure.
Yeah. Yep. Well, the alleys in Old Town Pasadena are just stunning because they didn't need them for access anymore because the merchants got together and built all the parking structures so they could deprogram the alleys from cars, and they're just fantastic.
Absolutely love that place.
I'm gonna lose you all, but I love the mission in the city, just walking those alleys, and the graffiti and I'm the only 60-year-old who loves graffiti, but what they did is it just brings in, there were probably hundreds of people just walking those alleys, up there.
Thank you, Butch. Dan, did you have another comment?
Can I make one more comment, Adam?
Oh yeah, sorry, I thought you were done, Butch.
No, I had a second
No,
question.
my mistake there. Sorry. Butch.
That's all right. That's all right. The other piece I'd mentioned earlier about the wind issue on a downtown and checking it. When we designed the Hammer Theater in downtown San Jose on the Paseo, the whole front of the Hammer Theater opened. So the lobby would open out and spill out onto the Paseo. Once we built it, the wind was too strong, and that building has never opened the front panels into the lobby because the wind is just too strong. So I like the idea of the openness, the open frontage, but again, wind and yeah, you should take a look at it. Wind and sun were a big factor in that. So beautiful element that would have been perfect for a theater, opening that lobby up, spilling out for intermission, can't be used at all because of the wind factor that was never taken into consideration.
Well, yeah, Jim, let's see how we can leverage the CEQA scope to look at that. That's a terribly important thing. Actually, we're redesigning Main Street in Ventura right now to make it into a programmable, closable space that can accommodate a lot of outdoor dining and then be closed off with bollards, a little bit like the 3rd Street Mall in Santa Monica. But well, not just like, anyway. And one of the key considerations is and we've got this big refrigerator right there called the Pacific Ocean. And, about 4 o'clock every day, the cold wind, comes in. So that has to be considered for sure.
Yeah, there's actually a cafe right, as a sort of right next to that theater, part of the building, and they ended up putting like plexiglass fence, a tall plexiglass fence around their whole patio seating so people could actually sit outside and not get blown over.
Yeah, we're coming up with basically sort of a kit of parts of bollards and umbrellas and heaters and little wind screens that we're planning to have a pavement system with little embeds in it where people can put in little wind screens and space heaters and umbrellas along new wider sidewalks in the parking zone.
And David, those are right. But as I said, Indianapolis, if you've ever been in Indianapolis, they built that tall enough, that Main Street tall enough that the wind is at certain times, a windscreen isn't going to do anything for you. You are literally blown down the street.
Because you're just
the
in the tunnel.
Yeah, because because I don't know if you've been in Indianapolis, but it's all flat.
Not for a long time.
When you hit downtown Indianapolis, it hits all those buildings and just funnels everything through these corridors. And again, we saw the same in a mini thing on the Paseo in downtown San Jose on certain times of the day. So that was my only point. I don't want to berate it.
We'll have to look at that. And also to the extent things are openable, they also have to be closable. For sure. You gotta have a backup plan. Thank you, Butch.
All right, thanks, David. Thanks, everybody. I just have one comment. The one thing I didn't see in, excuse me, in your slide deck was any kind of parking. So how do we, is there anything that would dictate, like, I guess what I'm getting at is I like the idea of putting parking to where it can either be converted at a later date if it's not needed, or demolished and something built in its place, well, you know, over the long term. So is there a mechanism that would allow us to do that in the form-based code? Or push for that? Or not really?
Well, we can talk about that. That's a very interesting question.
Like for instance, if you're going to build a parking structure, right? I would want all parking decks to be level, not at you know, as ramps. So that way they can be converted into housing later.
Here's an interesting one for you. So there's our office on the 11th floor of this historic building on Hill Street. And then here at the corner of Broadway and 7th is a 7-story parking structure. Jesus, come on, go down to the ground there. Why is this? I've never seen Google do this sort of stupid thing before. Hold on. Okay. This is a parking structure. And in 1903, it was built as the original Bullock's department store. Here's the Los Angeles. This is Broadway in LA. It's just incredible. It was where all the department stores and movie theaters in Los Angeles were. So this building now is a parking. That was the first big department store in Los Angeles. And later on, when the department store moved out, they just built a ramp, and now they park all in it. So it's about 10 or 11 feet floor to floor. And it was a department store for 40 or 50 years. And now it's been a parking structure for 40 or 50 years. No, but as was mentioned earlier, I can't remember who mentioned it. The price, well, maybe it was you, Adam, probably was, that the flexibility to reuse a building later for office or parking means, I mean, this was an expensive building at the time it was built. It's a stout old concrete building that's been there 120 years. And so flexibility costs a lot of money. So the question is whether it's reasonable to build an office building or housing to a whether it's reasonable to build a parking structure to a standard that it could be converted to office or housing later, or whether it should just be built as a parking structure, and then if you don't need it later, you just knock it over. But for, like a year and a half ago, when we were doing the early work on this in a little charrette, when we were up there working with Leslie and Jim and the team, we were looking at the possibility of building parking structures with flat floors and ramps that could be taken out later, and the building could be converted to housing or office. So I think that's something we can. Jim, have we already asked Ben and his team to look at the financial feasibility of that?
Yeah, and that's what we're actually showing in the model still, is we've got the speed ramps that are attached to the outside, and
Gotcha.
it's all horizontal floor plates. So I think that's definitely the direction that we've been talking about. And it would be nice to, just flesh that out a little bit more as we get into the plan and the code.
Okay, cool. And actually, I think this theater is going to turn into this theater, or one of these. All the theaters in LA were along Broadway. One of these theaters is being converted to an Apple store.
Oh God. Don't tell me the state. I know I've been in every one of those theaters.
I don't think I think it's the Tower.
Yeah,
the deed has been done.
Oh, okay, there you go.
They
Well, I haven't
converted
been
the tower.
downtown much for a year and a half, so I'm out of date. I've been working from my house here for a year and a half. Okay, so yeah, I think, you know, simple flat floor structures, you know, 10 or 11 feet floor to floor can be a lot of, I mean, a huge number of the buildings down here were built as office buildings, and now they've been turned into apartments. And they were almost all these buildings were built between 1924 and 1929.
All right, are there any other comments before we go to the public? I think everybody once, twice. All right, open it up for public comment on form-based code, item number 3. Anyone from the public would like to speak, please raise your hand. All right, Donna.
Oh, hey.
Go ahead, Donna.
Welcome,
Donna.
Donna.
Unmute. Can you hear me? Yes,
Yeah.
thank you.
Just one quick question. This really looks fantastic, and thank you everyone on the task force, WRT and David. And I won't name the whole task force, but you are all amazing, and I can't wait until I see this. But we're talking about Ventura, and I use that as an example when I tell people, is there density building in Ventura around downtown somewhere? And can you kind of back out and show people, or do you have that day old discussion about density in downtown? And that's it. I just wondered if Ventura has density around it. And that's it.
Surprisingly little after. I mean, so right after the form-based code was adopted, then we had the Great Recession. And then a lot of the focus over the last 8 or 10 years has been on improving the business mix within the building stock that's already there, more than adding a lot of density in the downtown. There are a number of projects that are about to come out of the ground, though, that are going to be very significant from a density standpoint.
Surrounding it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, more surrounding it than right in it, because I mean, unlike you guys, and I'm not rubbing salt in the wound here, I'm just mentioning that, you know, the 1-story building stock that was always there just never went away. And so I think you're going to find, and the original strategy of the specific plan we did in the early 90s was to surround the core with more dense housing, and that's happening finally.
So if we looked at other areas, maybe around Warburton or El Camino, you know, those are good places in the city. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Donna.
Thank you, Donna.
Next speaker, Mary Grizzle. Welcome, Mary.
Hi, I just want to.
Oop.
Hear me? Can you hear me?
There you go.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yep.
I just want to thank everybody, the WRT, the task force, but in particularly, I want to thank David Sargent. He's really been a rock star the last couple of meetings that I've attended, and I am so appreciative of everything he's done. Thank you and have a great day.
Oh,
Thank you, Mary.
thank you, Mary. It's our pleasure.
All right. Any additional comments? Anyone else from the public like to speak? All right. Close public comment on item number 3. I think that we need to go to public presentation. So is there anyone in the public that would like to address the task force on items that are not on this agenda this evening? Please raise your hand. Oh, Jonathan. Go ahead, Jonathan.
Hello. So as someone who's invested a lot of time and energy in the downtown plan and process, I wanted WRT and Mr. Sargent to know that I'm disappointed with what has been proposed here tonight. If this goes before council on the 28th without a plan for handling historic resources, I'll speak out against this plan. It would be better to delay the presentation to the council than present a plan that fails at such a basic level to listen to the community's desires. Please don't make this downtown precise plan process share the same fate as El Camino Real precise plan. We don't need another dumpster fire. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Patricia?
Hey, I just wanted to echo some of Jonathan's sentiments. I'm very disappointed in the lack of strong protection for historical properties within the planned area. Block J is a tremendously important interface with the historic neighborhood, and it was not treated with the respect it deserves. We've been presented time and time again that townhouses pencils out better than apartments and condos. I'm disappointed that that was not proposed with Block J. I don't think the council should see this plan in its current form. I understand staff has worked really hard to pull all this together, but if the plan goes up to the council as is, I am willing to throw out the baby with the bathwater. Like, I think the presentation to council should be delayed to make this correction. The sooner WRT rectifies the situation, the sooner it can be presented and like less back and forth, and the faster we can continue with the rest of the really good work. I mean, like everything else looks great. Thank you.
Thank you, Patricia. Mary?
I thought that we were going to, I thought that the protections for those homes would come with a form-based code and not the specific plan. I do not want to delay the specific plan any further. I would like this to go to council ASAP and have the, like David Sargent and everybody said, the protections come is with a form-based code. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary.
Could I clarify one thing about that?
Yeah, go ahead, David.
Based on what I understood the consensus of your task force to be, I was indicating that the form-based code could require that new buildings adjacent to, across the street from, or otherwise nearby buildings that had been designated as historic and were intended to remain pretty much permanently, possess certain characteristics of scale, size, form, character that would render them appropriate neighbors to historic buildings. That's a different thing from putting a provision in the plan that says that those buildings may never be taken away or significantly altered. The form-based code would not provide historic land use designations. They would not designate something a historic landmark. The form-based code would not create a historic district. It would not supersede the Secretary of the Interior's standards for preservation of designated historic structures. It would not include an inventory or assessment of the potential historic value of individual structures. And to just do that without such procedures would be more or less spot zoning. And as I think Mary or somebody mentioned, that, you know, the taking away the right of a person who owns a building to do something with it is a fairly serious move.
Maybe I can just add a couple of words, Adam.
Yeah,
David, if you wouldn't mind flipping to that one corner view that shows I
sure.
and J. So
yeah.
I think, you know, I think the spirit of what we've been working on here is one that honors the scale and character, you know, of these remaining
yes,
you know, houses, which some are designated historic. We're sort of using historic as a blanket term here. And so and the comments I've heard tonight is that is generally the right direction, that we want this plan to honor and value that scale. We want to incentivize those owners to retain that scale through density transfers and whatnot. So I think this is the direction we're going. It's how we do that has not been fleshed out, but I think that's also normal for the stage in the process.
Yes.
We are. I think that can be fleshed out as we draft the language of the precise plan. Additionally, I think that the attention to these infill buildings and how they step down in scale, to the outer edges of the block, all of that, again, is intended to honor scale and character. What I've also heard tonight is that we want to study this further. We want to go deeper into how these incentives and protection mechanisms could work, and also look at the maybe a different form of infill on Franklin Street, on this back corner, maybe going to this live work configuration, more of a townhome shape. So I think those are things we can study also. It's up to Leslie and her team in terms of process and what we take to council and whatnot. But I just wanted to comment that I don't see a big departure here from the direction that the plan has been going, and I think we can continue to look at that more closely.
Jim, David, I guess a question that I think is kind of coming out of all this is, I think the 28th, and correct me if I'm wrong, Leslie, or anybody, the 28th, what you're looking to do is get the general approval from council based on the overall square footage and mix of, product type in order to start the EIR process.
And building heights.
Well, it's the framework.
And building heights.
It's the framework also.
And I would add, it's not just to start the EIR process, it's to start the process of actually writing the precise plan, which is not yet written. So
and that's where I was going to get with my next comment is there's still time to put in these protections, and we can still adjust even the height, Leslie. We can make minor adjustments to it as we continue on, right? It's not set in stone because it's not the final plan approval. It's the generalization and the direction we're headed.
Right, that's correct.
This is what's being taken to them is the overall intentions for the types of outcomes that the precise plan, when we write it, will be intended to generate.
Which is why we show these buildings grade as existing, and they have development on them, right?
Right. So that's the general intention, but then how you accomplish that through policy, through regulations, through processes, through procedures, through specific zoning designations is all to be done in the near future.
Okay.
And has not yet been done at all.
Correct.
Yes. So we're all understand. We've heard the concern from the community as well as people in the DCTF that there needs to be something included in the plan to protect, the historical resources within the 10 blocks.
But the action the council is being asked to take is not going to be a final decision, or even really a decision at all about these specific details of a single building or how you're going to protect it and from what.
What is Leslie? What is the action council will have in front of them?
The action is to accept the preferred plan, which is what you see here, the development capacities that we showed you the table for earlier, the massing of the blocks and the heights, Those are the two things that make up our project
So-
description
Okay.
for the environmental impact report, and then, you know, set the base for, like David had said, you know, starting to craft the standard, the development standards, the zoning code requirements.
Is
all
it possible to put in the caveat that blocks I and J still have some work to be done, and the
Well, they all have
yeah,
work
no,
to be
I
done,
get
right?
it.
We don't have any, but yes, the intent is for the homes as they're shown, you know, to remain.
I just don't want council to say we hoodwinked them if we
Yeah.
show them this and then there's some deviations at the final plan and say, well, wait a minute, why'd you guys change that? It's like, well, we want to be clear and upfront that, hey, there's these 2 blocks and this historical, you know, issue and integration with the neighborhood that we still need to do a little more research and understanding of.
Let me ask this, can there be some specificity on those specific blocks and, you know, the work that we are still doing?
We're not ready. We're not ready to present that to them right now. We just want their initial acceptance of the work we've done so far and
Got
to
it.
move forward. We don't want to get stuck with keep on working and not check in with them, and they're like, hey,
So
this is
it's just a
horrible.
check-in.
I agree.
Yeah,
I
but
agree.
we
I
are, you
got
know,
it.
the action we're asking them to accept this and to move forward with continuing to work on this. And
Okay.
yeah, that does getting down into the details of how you treat every single block and the adjacencies when you have a historic home.
And I was just going to add the EIR process and the analysis that we're going to do. We're going to specifically be looking at cultural resources and do that analysis per CEQA and be able to kind of talk more specifically to the community concerns with like analysis. So this is really to kick off the description, the project description, so that we can begin the EIR analysis, because that hasn't even started yet.
And the making of the precise plan.
Yes.
Sure, absolutely.
We have, there's no precise plan.
Yeah, I'm
Nor
only
no-
asking
or code.
just to make sure that the community understands the process and what is being approved on the 28th and what is, you know, still. And it sounds like nothing's being approved. It's just a check-in and approval to continue to proceed with the plan that we created thus far and come back.
We're
once
hoping
the
that
work is completed.
we're hoping that they'll say, yeah, it looks like you're pretty much on the right track. Keep going and come back and tell us when you've got more.
Yeah,
Okay.
and I think at a framework level, right, which is very coarse grained, I think this plan is showing a preservation posture in blocks I and J. That's why we're showing these existing houses, as existing to remain. So I think that sets the intent. That's part of the framework.
Mhm.
And then how we do that is the subject of, the more detailed portions of the documents as we go forward.
Okay.
May I ask a question?
Go ahead.
Chair Adam?
Yeah. Oh, there we go. Sorry, Anna. I was on the other side of the screen.
Oh,
Go ahead.
so as part of this ask, just to say the check-in point, will the the form-based code be part of the discussion? Like, this is a check-in point and we would like to introduce the idea of using form-based code. Would that be part of the ask?
No, it's
No.
not.
Okay.
And they've already approved for us to move forward with the form-based. They've given us the budget. So that is a work item, which is why this is the kickoff for that work.
Oh, good. I wasn't clear if it was.
Yeah. Yes, it is.
Okay.
But for
thank you.
council on the 28th, we really are, what you're seeing in front of you, the preferred plan is really the base for all the rest of the work and writing the plan, as David said, and writing the form-based code. And
okay, cool.
Environmental document. So yeah.
Before we do all that work to make a plan and a code, we want to make sure that they want it to make a downtown that's kind of like this.
Got it. So it's just we're getting started.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Okay. All right. Patricia and Mary, are your hands still up? Do you want to speak or? Mary,
No way. Oh,
go
Mary.
ahead.
So are we gonna go forward with this or not? That's what I would like to know.
Yeah, yes,
Okay.
we're bringing this to council on the 28th
28th,
Thank you.
As a check-in. Thank you, Mary.
as a check-in, yes.
All right. We'll close public comment. Oh, wait, Skip,
But
go ahead.
yeah, hold on.
One more.
Go ahead, Skip.
Go ahead, Skip.
Mute yourself.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Just a quick question. Does this mean the consensus is that there would be 2 garages? Or is it still possible to have a much taller 1-car garage?
So this plan is just showing how it could be accomplished. The garage could, be on a different block or could be designed differently. So, or there could be more if they were necessary. Because we are doing a form-based code, the uses can move around within the blocks. But this is how we think that the plan would possibly be realized, given all the research we've done thus far.
And probably not taller. You couldn't take, for example, these 2 and stack them on top of each other.
Right.
The general guideline is, 6 levels is where you're maxing out above ground, because otherwise you're just endlessly driving around and around on ramps.
Right.
But
I
if you
like
do
that.
go 6 stories, you've got quite a view on the rooftop.
Absolutely. Yep.
Well, thank you, Skip. All right. Any additional hands from the public, or we close public comment? All right, we're going to close public comment. So that will wrap up our public presentations. So is there a motion to adjourn the meeting of September 16th?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second,
Thank you.
Who
All
was
in
the
favor?
second? Was that Dan? Sorry.
that was Ondersek.
Okay.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Just gotta let me finish. All in favor of adjourning the September 16th DCTF meeting, say aye.
Aye.
All in favor, say no. I'm glad no one wants to stay on. Thanks,
I
everybody.
love to
Appreciate everyone's
interrupt,
time.
Adam.
Great job, WRT and David.
Thank you.
Thank
Really
you. Good
appreciate
work.
it.
Excellent
Really
work.
valuable
guys. Great.
discussion tonight. Thank you all very much.
Jim,
Have a great
thank you,
evening.
and David, thank you. Peter, thanks.
Oh, thank
Great
you.
job,
Thank
you guys.
Adam.
Yep.
Good meeting, Adam, as usual.
Okay.
And committee, thanks.
Have a great evening.
All right. Good
Good
night.
night, everybody.
Night.
Good night.
Aye.